Welcome to the mountain town of South Park, where beneath the chaos and comedy lives a story of profound moral development and unwavering friendship. Tonight, we explore the extraordinary journey of Kyle Broflovsky, a boy whose intelligence burns as bright as his passion for justice, whose loyalty runs as deep as the Colorado snow, and whose growth from naive child to moral compass represents one of animation's most compelling character arcs. Close your eyes. Let the familiar voices of South Park fade to whispers, and prepare to drift through the complete chronicle of Kyle's transformation from argumentative third grader to the conscience of his generation. In the pristine suburban landscape of South Park, Colorado, where manicured lawns stretch towards snow-capped mountains and the American dream takes root in middle-class comfort, the Broflovsky household stands as a testament to intellectual aspiration and cultural complexity that would shape one of animation's most morally sophisticated characters. From his earliest moments on screen, Kyle Broflovsky emerged not as a blank slate waiting to be written upon by experience, but as a fully formed individual whose foundations were already being laid through the intricate dynamics of a family that valued education, wrestled with identity, and struggled to balance protection with growth. The pilot episode of South Park introduced audiences to a boy whose destiny as moral compass was already encoded in his DNA, though it would take years of development for that destiny to fully manifest itself through the crucible of childhood experience and the testing ground of friendship. The Broflovsky family structure represents a fascinating study in contrasts and contradictions, beginning with Gerald Broflovsky, Kyle's father, whose career as a lawyer provides both the economic foundation for their comfortable lifestyle and a complex moral framework that would influence Kyle's developing sense of justice in ways both positive and troubling. Gerald's profession immediately establishes the intellectual atmosphere of the household, where legal reasoning, argumentation, and the pursuit of justice through systematic channels become the backdrop against which Kyle's own analytical mind develops. Yet Gerald himself proves to be a morally ambiguous figure whose dedication to his family often conflicts with questionable professional choices and personal decisions that reveal the gap between idealism and reality that Kyle will spend his entire childhood learning to navigate. The economic comfort that Gerald's legal career provides creates a crucial context for understanding Kyle's character development as he grows up insulated from the grinding poverty that defines Kenny McCormick's existence, while remaining grounded enough to recognize privilege without becoming entitled by it. The Broflovsky home, with its modern amenities, well-stocked refrigerator, and comfortable furnishings, represents the stable foundation that allows Kyle the luxury of moral contemplation and intellectual development that might be impossible for children focused primarily on survival. This economic security enables Kyle to concern himself with questions of right and wrong rather than questions of basic necessity, creating the psychological space necessary for the development of the sophisticated ethical framework that will define his character throughout the series. Gerald's influence on Kyle extends far beyond simple financial provision to encompass the transmission of intellectual values and analytical approaches to problem solving that become fundamental aspects of Kyle's personality. From his father, Kyle inherits not just comfort with argumentation and debate, but also the understanding that words have power, that logical reasoning can be used to influence outcomes, and that the legal system, however flawed, represents humanity's best attempt to create order from chaos and justice from conflict. These lessons prove invaluable as Kyle navigates the complex social dynamics of elementary school and the broader challenges that South Park consistently presents to its residents, providing him with tools for analysis and intervention that his peers often lack. However, Gerald's moral complexity also serves as an early introduction to the uncomfortable reality that good people can make questionable choices, that intelligence does not guarantee wisdom, and that even those we love and respect can disappoint us through their actions. Episodes throughout the series reveal Gerald engaging in frivolous lawsuits, questionable schemes, and personal behavior that conflicts with the values he espouses, creating cognitive dissonance for Kyle that forces him to develop his own moral framework rather than simply adopting his father's wholesale. This tension between inherited values and observed behavior becomes a crucial element in Kyle's development, teaching him that moral authority must be earned through consistent action rather than claimed through position or relationship. The most dominating presence in Kyle's early development proves to be his mother, Sheila Broflovsky, whose protective instincts operate with such intensity that they threaten to overwhelm not just Kyle's developing autonomy, but the entire community's sense of normalcy and proportion. Sheila's helicopter parenting style, while rooted in genuine love and concern for her children's welfare, creates a psychological environment where Kyle must constantly navigate between his natural desire for independence and his recognition of his mother's sincere commitment to his safety and success. Her involvement in his daily life extends far beyond reasonable parental supervision to encompass detailed monitoring of his activities, aggressive intervention in his conflicts, and systematic attempts to control his exposure to influences she deems harmful or inappropriate. The pilot episode immediately establishes the pattern of Sheila's overprotective behavior through her reaction to Kyle and Ike watching Terrence and Philip, a response so disproportionate that it escalates into community-wide conflict and ultimately threatens the very existence of the television show that sparked her outrage. This incident serves as a perfect introduction to the dynamics that will define Kyle's relationship with his mother throughout the series. Her genuine concern for his welfare, expressed through actions that often embarrass him socially, while creating problems that extend far beyond their original scope. Kyle's response to his mother's behavior reveals the complexity of his emotional relationship with her authority, as he simultaneously loves and respects her while recognizing that her methods often create more problems than they solve. Sheila's protective instincts manifest most powerfully in her role as what might be termed a cultural warrior, fighting battles against influences she perceives as threats to her children's moral development and social success. Her campaigns against television content, holiday displays, and various forms of popular culture stem from her deep conviction that parental vigilance represents the primary defense against the corrupting influences of modern society. These crusades, while often misguided in their execution and disproportionate in their scope, reflect genuine concern for Kyle's spiritual and moral development that shapes his understanding of activism, social responsibility, and the power of individual conviction to create broader social change. Kyle's response to his mother's activism reveals the early development of his own moral sensibilities and his growing ability to distinguish between the underlying values she seeks to protect and the methods she employs to protect them. Throughout the series, Kyle consistently defends his mother's right to express her concerns while simultaneously feeling embarrassed by the extremity of her methods and the social consequences they create for him personally. This dynamic teaches Kyle crucial lessons about the relationship between private conviction and public action, the importance of proportionate response to perceived threats, and the ways that even well-intentioned activism can create unintended consequences that harm the very causes it seeks to advance. The Jewish identity that shapes the Broflovsky household provides Kyle with both a source of cultural richness and a constant reminder of his minority status within the predominantly Christian community of South Park. From his earliest appearances, Kyle's Judaism serves not as a simple demographic characteristic, but as a fundamental aspect of his worldview that influences his understanding of history, morality, and social responsibility. The traditions, holidays, and cultural practices that define Jewish life in the Broflovsky home create a parallel universe of meaning and celebration that exists alongside but distinct from the dominant Christian culture that surrounds them, teaching Kyle from an early age that multiple valid perspectives can coexist within the same community. This religious identity becomes particularly significant during holiday seasons, when Kyle must navigate the complex terrain of cultural difference, while maintaining friendships with children who celebrate Christmas with the unconscious assumption that their traditions represent the universal human experience. Kyle's early struggles with feeling excluded from Christmas celebrations and his discovery of alternative traditions that honor his heritage while allowing him to participate in seasonal joy demonstrate his developing ability to find creative solutions to identity conflicts that might otherwise create lasting resentment or cultural alienation. The introduction of Ike Broflovsky as Kyle's younger brother establishes one of the most important relationships in Kyle's life, while revealing crucial aspects of his developing personality. Through the evolution of their sibling dynamic, the pilot episode's famous "Kick the Baby" sequence serves as both comedy and character revelation, demonstrating Kyle's initial casual cruelty toward his vulnerable younger brother, while also establishing the foundation for what will become one of the series' most touching relationships as Kyle grows into his role as protector and guide. This early hostility toward Ike reflects Kyle's immaturity and his inability to understand the responsibilities that come with being an older sibling, but it also reveals personality traits that will serve him well once properly channeled. His physical courage, his willingness to take action when others hesitate, and his fundamental rejection of passivity in the face of perceived problems. The transformation of Kyle's relationship with Ike from casual hostility to protective devotion represents one of the most significant character developments in Kyle's early seasons, demonstrating his capacity for growth and his developing understanding of love, responsibility, and family loyalty. The episode Ike's Wee Wee serves as a crucial turning point in this relationship, as Kyle's discovery that Ike is adopted forces him to confront questions about the nature of family bonds and the difference between biological connection and emotional commitment. His initial rejection of Ike upon learning of the adoption reveals the limitations of his child's understanding of family relationships, but his ultimate recognition that love rather than blood creates true family bonds demonstrates the moral sophistication that will characterize his approach to all relationships throughout the series. Kyle's protective instincts toward Ike develop into one of his most consistent and admirable character traits, as he learns to recognize threats to his brother's welfare that others might miss or dismiss, while developing the courage to intervene even when such intervention requires personal sacrifice or social awkwardness. Episodes like Miss Teacher Bangs a Boy reveal Kyle's growing sophistication in recognizing inappropriate adult behavior and his willingness to take unpopular positions when protecting someone he loves, even when that protection requires him to oppose authority figures or challenge social assumptions about proper behavior and appropriate relationships. The intellectual gifts that Kyle demonstrates from his earliest appearances reflect both genetic inheritance from his educated parents and the stimulating environment they create through their emphasis on learning, questioning, and analytical thinking. Kyle's academic excellence, while sometimes played for comedy, represents a fundamental aspect of his character that enables him to serve as the voice of reason during the various crises that plague South Park, while providing him with tools for understanding complex situations that his peers often find overwhelming or incomprehensible. His straight-A academic performance reflects not just natural intelligence, but also the work ethic and commitment to excellence that his parents have instilled through their own modeling of professional achievement and intellectual curiosity. This early intellectual development creates both opportunities and challenges for Kyle as he navigates the social dynamics of elementary school, where academic success can create distance from peers, while providing teachers and adults with elevated expectations that may not account for his emotional and social development level. Kyle's intelligence often positions him as the natural leader during group projects and collaborative problem-solving situations, but it also creates pressure to have answers and solutions in situations where wisdom requires acknowledging uncertainty and accepting limitations. The balance between intellectual confidence and emotional humility becomes a recurring theme in Kyle's development as he learns to use his gifts in service of others, rather than as a means of establishing superiority or control. The family dynamics that shape Kyle's early development create a complex foundation of love, expectation, protection, and challenge that will influence every aspect of his character growth throughout the series. The Broflovsky household represents both sanctuary and laboratory, providing Kyle with the emotional security necessary for moral development, while also exposing him to the contradictions and complexities that characterize real family relationships. Gerald's moral ambiguity teaches Kyle that authority figures can be flawed while still deserving respect. Sheila's overprotectiveness demonstrates that love can become destructive when taken to extremes, and Ike's presence shows him that responsibility for others' welfare represents both burden and privilege that must be accepted willingly rather than imposed externally. The economic comfort, intellectual stimulation, and cultural richness of Kyle's family environment create advantages that enable his moral and intellectual development, while also creating obligations to use those advantages in service of others less fortunate. From his earliest episodes, Kyle demonstrates awareness of his privileged position within South Park's social hierarchy, while struggling to understand how to balance appreciation for his advantages with responsibility to address inequalities that affect his friends and community. This tension between privilege and responsibility becomes a driving force in Kyle's character development as he learns to recognize that moral authority requires not just good intentions, but also willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for others' welfare. The religious and cultural identity that permeates the Broflovsky household provides Kyle with both roots and wings, giving him a strong sense of who he is and where he comes from, while also requiring him to navigate difference and sometimes discrimination within his broader community. His Jewish heritage connects him to centuries of tradition, learning, and social responsibility, while also marking him as different from his predominantly Christian peers in ways that require constant negotiation and occasional defense. This experience of minority status within his own community teaches Kyle valuable lessons about empathy, tolerance, and the importance of standing up for those who face discrimination or marginalization, lessons that will serve him well as he encounters various forms of injustice throughout his development. The foundation that Kyle's family provides proves remarkably durable throughout the chaos and trauma that characterizes life in South Park, enabling him to maintain his moral center even when confronted with supernatural threats, community-wide crises, and the various forms of dysfunction that plague his peers and their families. The intellectual tools his parents provide, the emotional security their love creates, and the cultural framework their heritage offers combine to create psychological resources that enable Kyle to serve as a stabilizing force during times of crisis, while maintaining his own sense of purpose and direction, even when external circumstances become overwhelming or incomprehensible. As we observe Kyle's earliest character development, we see the emergence of patterns that will define his entire arc throughout the series. His intellectual gifts, combined with emotional sensitivity, his protective instincts channeled through moral conviction, his ability to maintain individual identity while participating in group dynamics, and his growing understanding that privilege creates responsibility rather than entitlement. These foundational elements, established through the complex dynamics of his family relationships and cultural identity, create the bedrock upon which all of Kyle's future growth will build, ensuring that even as he faces increasingly complex challenges and moral dilemmas, he will retain the core values and analytical capabilities that enable him to serve as South Park's conscience and his friends' moral guide. In the intricate social ecosystem of South Park Elementary, where childhood friendships are forged in the crucible of shared adventure and tested through the inevitable conflicts that arise when strong personalities collide, Kyle Broflovsky's relationships with his three closest companions represent far more than simple playground alliances or convenient partnerships born of proximity and circumstance. These bonds, established in the earliest episodes and maintained through countless trials, transformations, and near disasters, serve as the primary laboratory for Kyle's moral development and the testing ground for every ethical principle he develops throughout his journey from naive child to sophisticated moral philosopher. The dynamics that emerge between Kyle and Stan Marsh, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick create a complex web of loyalty, rivalry, protection, and growth that demonstrates how authentic friendship requires not just affection and shared experiences, but also the courage to challenge each other, the wisdom to forgive repeated failures, and the maturity to recognize that loving someone does not require approving of everything they do or say. The friendship between Kyle Broflovsky and Stan Marsh stands as perhaps the most stable and enduring relationship in the entire South Park universe. A bond so fundamental and unshakable that it serves as the emotional anchor for both characters throughout every crisis, transformation, and period of growth they experience during their development from elementary school through their adult years. From their earliest shared adventures, Kyle and Stan demonstrate an intuitive understanding of each other's thoughts, values, and emotional needs that transcends the typical childhood friendship to approach something closer to brotherhood or spiritual kinship. Their relationship operates on multiple levels simultaneously, functioning as practical partnership for problem-solving and adventure-seeking, emotional support system during times of personal crisis or family dysfunction, and moral sounding board for the ethical dilemmas that consistently plague their community and challenge their developing sense of right and wrong. The intellectual compatibility between Kyle and Stan manifests itself through their shared approach to analyzing the bizarre situations that routinely confront South Park's residents, as both boys demonstrate natural skepticism toward authority figures, supernatural claims, and social movements that seem to prioritize emotional manipulation over logical reasoning. When faced with crises ranging from alien visitations to religious conflicts to political scandals, Kyle and Stan consistently serve as voices of reason who question assumptions, demand evidence, and work together to develop practical solutions that address root causes rather than simply treating symptoms. This collaborative problem-solving approach strengthens their friendship, while also establishing their roles as the moral and intellectual leaders of their peer group, the individuals who others turn to when situations become too complex or dangerous for conventional childhood responses. Their emotional connection runs even deeper than their intellectual partnership, as Kyle and Stan provide each other with the kind of unconditional acceptance and understanding that enables authentic vulnerability and honest self-examination. Throughout the series, We witness countless moments when one friend serves as confidant and counselor for the other during periods of self-doubt, family conflict, or moral confusion that might otherwise lead to isolation or destructive behavior. Stan's struggles with depression and existential anxiety find their most compassionate audience in Kyle, who provides both practical support and emotional validation without judgment or condescension. Similarly, Kyle's tendency towards self-righteousness and moral perfectionism receives its most gentle but effective correction from Stan, who helps his friend recognize when idealism becomes counterproductive and when compromise serves justice better than absolute principle. The evolution of their friendship demonstrates remarkable resilience in the face of external pressures and internal conflicts that might easily destroy relationships built on less solid foundations. Episodes like Prehistoric Iceman reveal that even Kyle and Stan can experience serious disagreements that escalate into genuine anger and temporary separation. But these conflicts ultimately serve to strengthen their bond by proving that their friendship can survive honest confrontation and emerge with deeper understanding and renewed appreciation for what they mean to each other. Their ability to fight passionately about issues that matter to them while maintaining underlying respect and affection demonstrates the maturity of their relationship and their recognition that authentic friendship requires the freedom to disagree without fear of permanent rejection or abandonment. The loyalty that characterizes Kyle and Stan's friendship operates not as blind allegiance that prevents criticism or challenge, but as deep commitment to each other's welfare and growth that sometimes requires difficult conversations and unpopular positions. When Stan makes questionable choices or becomes involved in situations that threaten his safety or moral development, Kyle demonstrates willingness to risk social awkwardness, personal conflict, or even temporary estrangement, rather than remain silent and complicit in his friend's potential harm. This protective aspect of their friendship reflects Kyle's growing understanding that love sometimes requires intervention, and that true friends serve as guardians of each other's better angels, even when such guardianship creates short-term tension or discomfort. The contrast between Kyle's relationship with Stan and his dynamic with Eric Cartman could not be more stark or more revealing of the different ways that personality, values, and moral development can either create harmony or generate perpetual conflict between individuals forced to share the same social space. Where Kyle and Stan complement each other through shared values and compatible temperaments, Kyle and Cartman represent opposing forces in an eternal philosophical battle that touches on fundamental questions about human nature, social responsibility, and the proper relationship between individual desire and collective welfare. Their antagonism operates on multiple levels simultaneously, encompassing personal dislike, moral disagreement, cultural conflict, and intellectual rivalry that creates dramatic tension, while also driving both characters toward greater self-awareness and more sophisticated understanding of their own beliefs and motivations. The roots of Kyle and Cartman's conflict extend far beyond simple personality clash or childhood rivalry to encompass fundamental differences in their approaches to morality, relationships, and social responsibility that reflect broader tensions within American society and human nature itself. Kyle's commitment to justice, equality, and collective welfare stands in direct opposition to Cartman's narcissistic pursuit of personal advantage, his willingness to exploit others for entertainment or profit, and his complete absence of empathy or concern for the consequences his actions create for innocent people. These opposing worldviews create natural friction that escalates into elaborate schemes, passionate arguments, and occasionally dangerous confrontations that push both characters to articulate and defend their beliefs with increasing sophistication and intensity. The intellectual aspect of their rivalry proves particularly fascinating because both Kyle and Cartman possess considerable intelligence and creativity, but they channel these gifts toward completely different ends that reflect their opposing moral frameworks. Kyle uses his analytical abilities and persuasive skills to identify problems, develop solutions, and convince others to support causes that serve the broader community's interests, even when such causes require personal sacrifice or temporary discomfort. Cartman deploys his considerable cunning and manipulative talents to exploit others' weaknesses, advance his own interests at any cost, and create elaborate deceptions that serve his immediate desires without regard for long-term consequences or collateral damage to innocent people. Their conflicts escalate throughout the series, from simple childhood insults and petty schemes to elaborate psychological warfare and genuinely dangerous confrontations that reveal the depths of their mutual antagonism, while also demonstrating their grudging respect for each other's capabilities and determination. Episodes like the Imagination Land trilogy showcase both the extremity of their conflict and the strange codependency that develops between sworn enemies who understand each other better than anyone else while remaining fundamentally incompatible in their values and goals. Cartman's obsessive pursuit of Kyle's humiliation and Kyle's passionate commitment to exposing Cartman's schemes create a dynamic that transcends simple hatred to become a form of dark intimacy that neither character can fully escape or resolve. Despite their mutual antagonism, Kyle and Cartman's relationship includes moments of unexpected cooperation and even grudging mutual support that reveal the complexity of their bond and the ways that shared experiences create connections that transcend personal dislike or moral disagreement. When faced with external threats that endanger their community or threaten their mutual friends, Kyle and Cartman occasionally set aside their differences to work together toward common goals, though such cooperation typically proves temporary and fraught with tension as their fundamental incompatibility reasserts itself once the immediate crisis passes. These moments of alliance serve to highlight both the possibility of redemption and growth within even the most troubled relationships, and the reality that some differences run too deep to be permanently reconciled through good intentions or shared experiences. The evolution of Kyle's relationship with Kenny McCormick represents perhaps the most significant transformation in Kyle's approach to friendship and moral responsibility, as he gradually moves from casual indifference towards someone he considers socially inferior to deep protective concern for a vulnerable friend whose suffering demands intervention and advocacy. The early seasons of South Park reveal Kyle treating Kenny with the same casual dismissal and occasional cruelty that characterizes most of his peers' interactions with someone whose poverty, family dysfunction, and communication difficulties mark him as different and somehow less worthy of consideration or respect. This initial callousness reflects Kyle's childhood limitations and his absorption of social hierarchies that position economic status and social skills as measures of human worth rather than recognizing the inherent dignity that belongs to every individual regardless of their circumstances or capabilities. The transformation of Kyle's attitude toward Kenny begins gradually through accumulated exposure to Kenny's genuine kindness, loyalty, and willingness to sacrifice for others. Despite receiving minimal recognition or reciprocal support from those he consistently helps and protects, as Kyle matures and his moral sensibilities develop greater sophistication, he begins to recognize that his dismissive treatment of Kenny reflects poorly on his own character, while failing to acknowledge Kenny's authentic virtues and contributions to their friend group. This growing awareness creates cognitive dissonance that forces Kyle to examine his own prejudices and assumptions about worth, friendship, and social responsibility that ultimately leads to fundamental changes in how he understands and practices loyalty toward those who cannot advocate effectively for themselves. The pivotal moment in Kyle's relationship with Kenny occurs during Kenny's genuine death at the end of Season 5, when Kyle experiences profound grief and guilt over his failure to appreciate Kenny's friendship while he was alive and available for genuine connection and mutual support. This crisis forces Kyle to confront the reality that his intellectual commitment to justice and equality has not translated into consistent, compassionate behavior towards someone whose circumstances made him vulnerable to dismissal and neglect. The pain of this recognition creates lasting change in Kyle's approach to friendship and moral responsibility, as he develops deeper appreciation for Kenny's unique qualities and stronger commitment to protecting and supporting him in ways that honor his dignity and acknowledge his worth as an individual deserving of respect and care. The renewed friendship that develops between Kyle and Kenny after Kenny's return demonstrates Kyle's growth in empathy, loyalty, and moral sophistication, as he learns to look beyond surface characteristics and social assumptions to recognize the authentic person underneath external barriers and limitations. Kyle's willingness to invest effort in understanding Kenny's muffled speech, his growing recognition of Kenny's intelligence and wisdom, and his increasing appreciation for Kenny's heroic qualities reflect his developing ability to form relationships based on genuine connection rather than social convenience or conventional compatibility. This transformation in their dynamic serves as evidence of Kyle's moral development and his growing understanding that friendship requires active commitment and conscious choice rather than passive acceptance of social hierarchies and conventional assumptions about worth and belonging. The group dynamic that emerges among Kyle, Stan, Cartman, and Kenny creates a complex social laboratory where each character's individual traits and moral development can be observed, tested, and refined through constant interaction with personalities that challenge their assumptions and force them to articulate and defend their beliefs and values. Kyle's role within this group consistently positions him as the voice of reason and moral authority, the individual who others turn to for ethical guidance and practical leadership when situations become too complex or dangerous for conventional responses. This leadership role both privileges Kyle with influence and respect, while also burdening him with responsibility for outcomes and consequences that extend far beyond his individual actions to encompass the welfare and behavior of his entire peer group. The way Kyle navigates the competing demands and conflicting personalities within his friend group reveals his developing skills in diplomacy, compromise, and strategic thinking that serve him well in addressing the larger social and political challenges that consistently confront South Park's community. His ability to maintain friendship with Stan while managing conflict with Cartman and building trust with Kenny demonstrates sophisticated understanding of relationship dynamics and emotional intelligence that enables him to preserve group cohesion while advancing moral principles and protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation or harm. These interpersonal skills prove essential as the boys face increasingly complex adventures and crises that require coordination, mutual support, and shared commitment to solutions that serve everyone's interests, rather than simply advancing individual agendas. The testing of Kyle's friendships through various crises and adventures throughout the series reveals both the strength of the bonds he has formed and the ongoing work required to maintain relationships that matter deeply while continuing to grow and change as individuals with evolving needs, interests, and moral understanding. Episodes that separate the friends temporarily or create conflicts between them serve to demonstrate the resilience of authentic connection while also highlighting areas where growth and improvement remain necessary for the relationships to continue serving everyone's needs effectively. Kyle's consistent willingness to fight for his friendships, to forgive repeated failures and disappointments, and to maintain hope that people can change and grow, reflects his fundamental optimism about human nature and his deep commitment to the principles of loyalty and love that make meaningful relationships possible. The loyalty that Kyle demonstrates toward his friends operates not as uncritical support that enables destructive behavior, but as deep commitment to their welfare and growth that sometimes requires difficult confrontations and unpopular positions designed to challenge them toward greater self-awareness and more ethical behavior. His willingness to risk social awkwardness, personal conflict, or temporary estrangement, rather than remain silent when friends make choices that threaten their safety or moral development, demonstrates mature understanding of love and responsibility that transcends simple emotional attachment to encompass genuine concern for others' long-term well-being and spiritual growth. This approach to friendship reflects Kyle's developing wisdom about the difference between enabling and supporting, between acceptance and approval, and between loyalty and complicity in harmful or destructive behavior. The moments of betrayal, disappointment, and conflict that periodically strain Kyle's friendships serve not as evidence of relationship failure, but as opportunities for deeper understanding, more authentic connection, and renewed commitment to shared values and mutual support. Kyle's responses to friendship crises reveal his growing capacity for forgiveness, his increasing sophistication in analyzing complex interpersonal dynamics, and his developing ability to maintain love and concern for people whose behavior sometimes disappoints or hurts him without excusing harmful actions or lowering his expectations for better choices in the future. These experiences teach Kyle valuable lessons about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, the importance of boundaries in healthy relationships, and the ongoing work required to maintain connections that honor everyone's dignity while supporting continued growth and positive change. The special episodes and major adventures that define Kyle's friendships throughout the series serve as crucibles where the strength and authenticity of these relationships can be tested under extreme circumstances while revealing character traits and moral commitments that might remain hidden during ordinary daily interactions. Whether facing supernatural threats, community-wide crises, or personal tragedies that challenge their individual and collective resources, Kyle and his friends consistently demonstrate that their bonds transcend simple convenience or childhood habit to encompass genuine love, mutual commitment, and shared dedication to protecting and supporting each other through whatever challenges life presents. These extraordinary situations reveal the extraordinary nature of ordinary friendship when it is built on solid foundations of respect, honesty, and mutual commitment to each other's welfare and growth. The evolution of Kyle's approach to friendship throughout the series reflects his overall moral and emotional development, as he learns to balance individual needs with group responsibilities, personal principles with relational harmony, and idealistic expectations with realistic acceptance of human limitation and imperfection. His growing ability to love his friends while challenging their mistakes, to maintain loyalty while refusing to enable destructive behavior, and to preserve hope for positive change while accepting current reality demonstrates wisdom and maturity that serve him well in all his relationships and prepare him for the adult responsibilities and challenges that await him beyond the elementary school environment, where these crucial lessons were first learned and practiced. In the quiet moments of reflection between adventures, when the boys simply enjoy each other's company without crisis or conflict to drive their interactions, we glimpse the deep affection and genuine care that underlies all the drama and tension of their more challenging encounters, reminding us that friendship at its core represents a choice to value another person's welfare as highly as our own, and to commit ourselves to walking alongside them through whatever joys and sorrows life brings their way. In the vast landscape of human moral development, few journeys prove as compelling or as instructive as Kyle Broflovsky's transformation from a child whose ethical framework remained largely undefined and situationally dependent to a young person whose commitment to justice, compassion, and principled action would define not only his own character, but also serve as a guiding light for his entire community during its darkest and most confusing moments. This metamorphosis did not occur suddenly or through any single revelatory experience, but rather emerged gradually through the accumulation of encounters with injustice, suffering, and moral complexity that forced Kyle to examine his own beliefs, confront his limitations, and make conscious choices about the kind of person he wanted to become and the principles he would allow to govern his actions regardless of personal cost or social pressure. The earliest seasons of South Park reveal Kyle as a child whose moral sensibilities remained largely unformed and whose responses to ethical dilemmas reflected the typical inconsistency and self-interest that characterize normal childhood development rather than any coherent philosophical framework or deep commitment to universal principles of right and wrong. During this period, Kyle's behavior toward others often demonstrated the casual cruelty and thoughtless selfishness that mark immature personalities who have not yet developed the empathy and perspective-taking abilities necessary for genuine moral reasoning. His treatment of Kenny McCormick during these early episodes exemplifies this moral immaturity, as Kyle consistently dismissed Kenny's worth and ignored his suffering while focusing primarily on his own comfort and social advancement within their peer group. The turning point in Kyle's moral development can be traced to specific episodes and experiences that confronted him with the reality of suffering he had previously ignored or dismissed, forcing him to recognize that his comfortable assumptions about fairness and justice did not align with the actual experiences of those around him who lacked his privileges and advantages. Kenny's genuine death at the end of Season 5 represents perhaps the most significant catalyst for Kyle's ethical awakening, as he experienced profound grief and guilt over his failure to appreciate Kenny's friendship and recognize his inherent worth as a human being deserving of respect and compassion, regardless of his economic circumstances or social skills. This crisis of conscience created lasting changes in Kyle's approach to relationships and moral responsibility, as he began to understand that genuine goodness requires more than simply avoiding obviously harmful behavior, and extends to actively working to prevent suffering and promote welfare for all members of his community. The pain of recognizing his own complicity in Kenny's marginalization and the regret he felt over missed opportunities for genuine friendship and mutual support motivated Kyle to examine his other relationships and social attitudes with new honesty and self-awareness that revealed additional areas where his behavior fell short of his stated values and beliefs. The development of Kyle's capacity for guilt and moral self-examination represents a crucial step in his ethical evolution, as it demonstrates his growing ability to recognize the gap between his ideals and his actions, while taking personal responsibility for the consequences of his choices, rather than excusing himself through rationalization or blame shifting. Throughout the middle seasons of the series, Kyle consistently displays genuine remorse when his behavior causes harm to others, and more importantly, he translates this remorse into changed behavior and renewed commitment to living according to higher standards that honor the dignity and worth of every person he encounters. Kyle's famous speeches emerge during this period as both symptom and instrument of his moral development, reflecting his growing conviction that important truths must be articulated and defended, even when such articulation creates social awkwardness or personal discomfort. These speeches serve multiple functions within Kyle's character development, providing him with a vehicle for processing and expressing his evolving ethical understanding, while also establishing his role as moral teacher and conscience for his peer group and broader community. The content of these speeches reveals Kyle's increasing sophistication in analyzing complex social and ethical issues, while demonstrating his growing confidence in his ability to identify problems and propose solutions based on principles of justice and compassion. However, the development of Kyle's speech-making tendency also reveals one of his primary moral challenges: the risk that his commitment to being right might overshadow his commitment to being kind, and that his desire to teach and correct others might become a form of intellectual pride that serves his ego rather than genuinely helping those who need guidance and support. Throughout his development, Kyle struggles with the balance between appropriate moral leadership and self-righteous lecturing, learning gradually that effective moral influence requires humility, empathy, and respect for others' autonomy, rather than simply superior knowledge or stronger convictions about right and wrong. The evolution of Kyle's speeches throughout the series reflects his growing wisdom about the relationship between truth and love, as his later moral pronouncements demonstrate greater sensitivity to his audience's needs and circumstances, while maintaining his commitment to important principles and his willingness to challenge harmful behavior or attitudes. His best speeches combine intellectual clarity with emotional warmth, practical wisdom with idealistic vision, and prophetic challenge with pastoral care that honors both the importance of moral truth and the dignity of those who need to hear and respond to that truth. Kyle's relationship with trauma and its role in shaping moral character becomes increasingly apparent as the series progresses, and he faces more serious challenges to his safety, relationships, and understanding of how the world operates. Rather than becoming cynical or bitter in response to disappointment and suffering, Kyle consistently demonstrates remarkable resilience and an ability to transform painful experiences into wisdom and compassion that benefits not only himself but also others who face similar struggles. His responses to various crises reveal his developing understanding that suffering can either harden hearts or soften them, depending on how individuals choose to interpret and respond to their difficult experiences. The way Kyle processes and integrates traumatic experiences demonstrates his growing emotional and spiritual maturity, as he learns to acknowledge pain and loss without becoming trapped in victimhood or resentment, while using his understanding of suffering to develop greater empathy for others who face their own challenges and difficulties. This transformation of pain into compassion represents one of the most admirable aspects of Kyle's character development and serves as evidence of genuine moral growth rather than simply intellectual development or social conditioning. Kyle's growing sense of justice manifests itself not only in his personal relationships but also in his responses to broader social and political issues that affect his community and the world beyond South Park. As his moral sensibilities develop, Kyle becomes increasingly intolerant of injustice and inequality wherever he encounters them, regardless of whether such injustice affects him personally or threatens his own interests and comfort. This expanding circle of moral concern reflects his developing understanding that ethical principles must be applied consistently and universally, rather than selectively based on personal preferences or tribal loyalties. The courage Kyle displays in confronting injustice grows throughout the series as his moral convictions strengthen and his confidence in his ability to identify and address problems increases through successful experiences of intervention and advocacy. However, his approach to fighting injustice also becomes more sophisticated over time, as he learns that good intentions alone are insufficient to create positive change, and that effective activism requires strategic thinking, coalition building, and careful attention to unintended consequences that might undermine even the most well-intentioned efforts to help others. Kyle's evolving relationship with authority figures reveals another important dimension of his moral development, as he learns to distinguish between legitimate authority that serves justice and collective welfare, and illegitimate authority that serves only the interests of those in power, while causing harm to vulnerable individuals and communities. This discernment enables Kyle to maintain appropriate respect for parents, teachers, and community leaders, while also developing the courage to challenge them when their actions or decisions conflict with important moral principles or cause unnecessary suffering for those who cannot effectively advocate for themselves. The development of Kyle's capacity for moral reasoning becomes increasingly evident through his approach to complex ethical dilemmas that require him to weigh competing values and consider multiple perspectives before determining appropriate responses and actions. Rather than simply following rules or emotional impulses, Kyle demonstrates growing ability to analyze situations systematically, consider long-term consequences, and choose courses of action that honor multiple important principles while minimizing harm and maximizing benefit for all affected parties. This sophisticated approach to ethical decision-making reflects not only Kyle's intellectual gifts, but also his growing emotional maturity and his deepening commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect regardless of their social status, personal characteristics, or past behavior. His ability to separate his evaluation of actions from his assessment of persons enables Kyle to oppose harmful behavior while maintaining compassion for those who engage in such behavior, recognizing that people can change and grow when given appropriate support and encouragement. Kyle's understanding of the relationship between individual responsibility and collective welfare becomes more nuanced throughout his development, as he learns that genuine morality requires both personal integrity and social engagement, both individual excellence and community service. This balanced approach to ethics prevents Kyle from falling into either self-centered individualism that ignores social obligations or collectivist thinking that submerges individual dignity and responsibility within group identity and conformity pressures. The way Kyle handles moral failures and setbacks reveals his growing wisdom about the nature of human limitation and the importance of forgiveness, both for oneself and for others who fall short of important ethical standards. Rather than becoming paralyzed by perfectionism or discouraged by inevitable mistakes and poor choices, Kyle learns to view moral failures as opportunities for learning and growth, while maintaining high standards and clear expectations for himself and others. Kyle's relationship with forgiveness becomes particularly important in his ongoing conflicts with Eric Cartman, whose behavior consistently challenges Kyle's commitment to compassion and his belief in the possibility of redemption and positive change. Through his interactions with Cartman, Kyle learns difficult lessons about the difference between forgiveness and enabling, between compassion and naivety, and between hope for change and acceptance of persistent harmful behavior that requires firm boundaries and sometimes decisive intervention. The development of Kyle's moral courage manifests itself through his willingness to take unpopular positions and make personal sacrifices when important principles are at stake, even when such choices create social isolation or personal hardship. This courage grows throughout the series as Kyle's confidence in his moral reasoning increases, and his commitment to justice deepens beyond mere intellectual agreement, to encompass authentic willingness to pay the costs that principled living sometimes requires. Kyle's evolving understanding of the relationship between means and ends becomes increasingly sophisticated as he learns that good intentions cannot justify harmful methods, and that the way important goals are pursued matters as much as the goals themselves. This insight prevents Kyle from falling into utilitarian thinking that would sacrifice individual rights or dignity for supposedly greater collective benefits, while also protecting him from idealistic thinking that ignores practical considerations and real-world constraints on moral action. The way Kyle integrates his growing moral sophistication with his continuing development as a normal child facing typical developmental challenges demonstrates his remarkable ability to maintain both idealism and realism, both high standards and compassionate understanding of human limitation and complexity. This integration prevents his moral development from becoming either preachy intellectualism that lacks emotional warmth or sentimental emotionalism that lacks principled foundations and practical wisdom. Kyle's role as moral teacher and conscience for his peer group evolves throughout the series as he learns more effective ways to influence others toward positive choices and ethical behavior while respecting their autonomy and dignity. His growing skill in moral leadership reflects not only his increasing knowledge and conviction, but also his developing emotional intelligence and his deepening understanding of how people learn and change in response to various forms of guidance and support. The humility that Kyle develops alongside his moral confidence represents one of the most important aspects of his character growth, as he learns that genuine wisdom requires ongoing questioning, self-examination, and openness to new information and perspectives, rather than rigid adherence to previously formed opinions and judgments. This humility prevents Kyle's moral development from becoming self-righteousness while maintaining his commitment to important principles and his willingness to advocate for justice and compassion, even when such advocacy requires personal cost or social conflict. In contemplating Kyle's transformation from morally ambiguous child to principled young leader, we witness one of fiction's most compelling portraits of how genuine virtue develops through the conscious choice to care about others' welfare as much as our own, and the sustained commitment to translate that caring into consistent action that honors the dignity and worth of every person we encounter along our journey toward wisdom and compassion. In the constellation of intellectual gifts that distinguish certain individuals from their peers and enable them to navigate complex challenges with clarity and precision that others find impossible to achieve, Kyle Broflovsky's mental capacities represent a fascinating study in how natural intelligence combines with environmental encouragement and personal dedication to create analytical capabilities that serve not only individual success, but also collective welfare and moral progress within communities that desperately need voices of reason during times of confusion and crisis. From his earliest appearances in South Park, Kyle's intellectual superiority over most of his classmates becomes apparent not through boastful display or academic showmanship, but through his consistent ability to identify problems that others miss, develop solutions that others cannot conceive, and articulate complex ideas in ways that help others understand situations that initially seem overwhelming or incomprehensible to minds less equipped for systematic analysis and logical reasoning. Kyle's academic excellence manifests itself most obviously through his consistent straight-A performance throughout elementary school, a record that reflects not merely natural ability or favorable circumstances, but sustained commitment to learning and intellectual growth that sets him apart from classmates who approach education as obligatory burden rather than opportunity for expansion of knowledge and understanding. His teachers consistently recognize Kyle as their most capable student, the child they can depend upon to grasp new concepts quickly, complete assignments thoroughly, and contribute meaningfully to classroom discussions through questions and observations that demonstrate genuine engagement with material rather than superficial compliance with educational requirements. This academic success provides Kyle with confidence in his intellectual abilities, while also creating expectations from adults and peers that he will serve as leader and problem solver during situations that require analytical thinking and strategic planning. The breadth of Kyle's intellectual curiosity extends far beyond the formal curriculum of elementary education to encompass interests in technology, politics, philosophy, and social issues that typically engage minds much older and more experienced than his own. His ability to understand and discuss complex topics ranging from economic theory to international relations to scientific methodology reveals a level of intellectual sophistication that enables him to participate meaningfully in adult conversations while maintaining the fresh perspective and moral clarity that adults often lose through years of compromise and cynical accommodation to practical limitations. This unusual combination of intellectual maturity and moral idealism positions Kyle as a unique voice within his community, someone capable of understanding complex problems while maintaining commitment to solutions that honor important principles, rather than simply accepting expedient compromises. Kyle's natural skepticism represents perhaps his most valuable intellectual tool, enabling him to question assumptions, demand evidence, and resist manipulation by authority figures who rely on emotional appeals rather than logical arguments to advance their agendas and achieve their goals. Throughout the series, Kyle consistently demonstrates healthy doubt toward claims that seem too good to be true, explanations that conveniently avoid accountability, and movements that promise simple solutions to complex problems without acknowledging potential costs or unintended consequences. This skeptical orientation protects Kyle from many of the deceptions and manipulations that successfully ensnare his more credulous peers, while also positioning him to serve as early warning system for his community when dangerous ideas or individuals threaten collective welfare through false promises or hidden agendas. However, Kyle's skepticism operates selectively rather than universally, as his intellectual honesty compels him to acknowledge evidence even when it contradicts his preferences or challenges his preconceptions about how reality should operate according to his moral framework and personal desires. Episodes throughout the series demonstrate Kyle's willingness to revise his beliefs when presented with compelling evidence, even when such revision requires him to admit previous errors or accept uncomfortable truths about situations he would prefer to understand differently. This intellectual flexibility prevents Kyle's skepticism from becoming mere cynicism or reflexive contrarianism, while maintaining his commitment to truth-seeking regardless of whether discovered truths align with his hopes and expectations. The development of Kyle's technological skills reflects his generation's natural comfort with digital tools, combined with his particular aptitude for understanding complex systems and using them to achieve specific objectives that serve both personal interests and broader community needs. From his early demonstrations of computer literacy to his more advanced capabilities in internet research, data analysis, and digital communication, Kyle consistently shows ability to master new technologies quickly and deploy them effectively for purposes ranging from academic research to criminal investigation to social activism. His technological competence provides him with powerful tools for gathering information, organizing supporters, and communicating important messages, while also creating new opportunities for positive impact that previous generations could not access or utilize. Kyle's problem-solving methodology reveals sophisticated understanding of analytical thinking that enables him to break down complex challenges into manageable components, identify key variables and relationships, and develop systematic approaches to finding solutions that address root causes rather than merely treating superficial symptoms. When confronted with crises ranging from school conflicts to community-wide disasters to interpersonal relationship problems, Kyle consistently demonstrates ability to step back from immediate emotional responses, gather relevant information, consider multiple perspectives and possible outcomes, and design interventions that maximize benefits while minimizing risks and unintended consequences. This systematic approach to problem-solving serves Kyle well in academic contexts, while also making him invaluable during emergency situations that require clear thinking and decisive action. The speed of Kyle's mental processing becomes particularly apparent during crisis situations when others become overwhelmed by information overload or paralyzed by analysis paralysis. While Kyle maintains ability to synthesize complex data rapidly and identify courses of action that others might require much longer to recognize or develop, his quick thinking enables him to respond effectively to rapidly changing circumstances, while also providing guidance and direction for peers who lack either the intellectual tools or emotional stability necessary for effective decision-making under pressure. This mental agility proves essential during many of South Park's various emergencies and adventures, where delays in recognition and response could result in serious harm to individuals or the broader community. Kyle's capacity for strategic thinking manifests itself through his ability to anticipate consequences, plan multiple steps ahead, and consider how current actions might affect future opportunities and constraints in ways that enable him to achieve long-term objectives, rather than simply reacting to immediate pressures and demands. This forward-thinking orientation helps Kyle avoid many of the short-sighted decisions that create problems for his peers, while also enabling him to identify opportunities for positive impact that others miss due to their focus on immediate gratification or their inability to recognize how present choices shape future possibilities. His strategic capabilities prove particularly valuable during complex social and political situations where multiple parties have competing interests, and where simple solutions rarely address underlying tensions and conflicts effectively. The quality of Kyle's logical reasoning enables him to identify flaws in arguments, recognize invalid inferences, and construct coherent justifications for his own positions that can withstand scrutiny from intelligent critics who might disagree with his conclusions but must acknowledge the rigor of his analytical process. This logical discipline protects Kyle from many forms of manipulation and deception, while also enabling him to serve as effective advocate for causes and individuals who need someone capable of articulating their interests clearly and defending their rights persuasively. His reasoning abilities also help him navigate complex moral dilemmas where emotions and principles might conflict, enabling him to find solutions that honor important values while remaining practical and achievable given real-world constraints and limitations. Kyle's intellectual confidence grows throughout the series As his analytical successes accumulate and his understanding of his own capabilities becomes more accurate and realistic, enabling him to take on increasingly challenging problems while maintaining appropriate humility about the limitations of his knowledge and the possibility that he might be wrong about important issues. This balanced self-assessment prevents Kyle's intellectual gifts from becoming sources of arrogance or isolation, while encouraging him to use his abilities boldly when situations require intellectual leadership and analytical intervention. His growing confidence also enables him to challenge authority figures and popular opinions when his analysis suggests they are wrong or harmful, even when such challenges create social awkwardness or personal risk. The burden of intellectual superiority becomes increasingly apparent as Kyle matures and recognizes that his analytical abilities often isolate him from peers who cannot follow his reasoning or who feel threatened by his capacity to identify problems and solutions that they cannot understand or develop independently. This intellectual loneliness creates ongoing challenges for Kyle as he struggles to maintain friendships and social connections, while also remaining true to his commitment to truth and logical analysis, regardless of whether his conclusions prove popular or socially convenient. The tension between intellectual honesty and social acceptance requires Kyle to develop sophisticated social skills and emotional intelligence that enable him to share his insights effectively without alienating those who might benefit from his perspective and guidance. Kyle's approach to learning demonstrates genuine intellectual curiosity combined with disciplined study habits that enable him to master difficult material, while also maintaining broad interests that enrich his understanding of how different fields of knowledge connect and inform each other in ways that create deeper insight and more effective problem-solving capabilities. His willingness to invest time and effort in understanding complex topics reflects his recognition that knowledge represents both personal enrichment and social responsibility, as those with greater intellectual gifts have obligations to use them in service of collective welfare rather than simply personal advancement or individual satisfaction. The evolution of Kyle's intellectual humility throughout the series reflects his growing understanding that intelligence alone cannot solve all problems, and that effective leadership requires not only analytical capability but also emotional wisdom, practical experience, and deep understanding of human nature and social dynamics that cannot be acquired through books or logical reasoning alone. This recognition prevents Kyle's intellectual development from becoming intellectual pride, while encouraging him to continue learning from others whose different perspectives and experiences provide valuable insights that complement his analytical strengths and help him develop more complete understanding of complex situations and effective responses to challenging problems. Kyle's role as intellectual mentor and guide for his peers develops gradually as his friends and classmates learn to recognize the value of his analytical contributions and his commitment to using his gifts in service of their collective welfare rather than his personal advantage or glory. This mentoring function requires Kyle to develop teaching skills and communication abilities that enable him to share complex ideas in ways that others can understand and apply, while also learning to respect others' autonomy and dignity rather than simply imposing his conclusions or treating them as intellectual inferiors who need his guidance to function effectively. The relationship between Kyle's intellectual gifts and his moral development proves particularly fascinating, as his analytical abilities enable him to recognize ethical complexities and moral inconsistencies that others miss, while also providing him with tools for developing coherent principles and systematic approaches to living according to values that promote justice and compassion. However, his intellectual sophistication also creates temptations toward moral pride and self-righteousness that require ongoing vigilance and conscious humility to avoid the trap of believing that being right grants license to be unkind or dismissive toward those whose understanding remains less developed or whose conclusions differ from his own. Kyle's growing understanding of the limitations of purely intellectual approaches to human problems reflects his maturing wisdom about the complementary roles of reason and emotion, analysis and intuition, individual insight and collective wisdom in addressing challenges that require not only correct understanding, but also practical implementation and sustained commitment from multiple parties with different interests and capabilities. This recognition helps Kyle develop more effective leadership styles that honor both the importance of rigorous thinking and the reality of human psychology and social dynamics that must be understood and respected for positive change to occur. The intellectual legacy that Kyle creates through his analytical contributions to South Park's various challenges demonstrates how individual gifts can serve collective welfare when combined with moral commitment and practical wisdom that enable abstract insights to translate into concrete improvements in people's lives and community functioning. His example shows that intellectual superiority becomes genuine leadership only when paired with authentic concern for others' welfare and willingness to use one's gifts in service of justice and compassion rather than personal aggrandizement or social dominance. In the quiet moments of contemplation when Kyle processes complex information and develops new understanding of challenging problems, we witness the beautiful synthesis of natural ability, disciplined effort, and moral commitment that transforms raw intelligence into wisdom that serves not only individual success, but also collective flourishing and social progress that benefits everyone who has the privilege of living in communities guided by voices of reason and compassion. In the intricate tapestry of American religious and cultural identity, where faith traditions intersect with secular values and minority experiences navigate the complex terrain of belonging within majority-dominated communities, Kyle Broflovsky's journey as South Park's primary Jewish character represents far more than simple demographic representation or comedic religious stereotyping. His experience embodies the profound challenges and unexpected opportunities that emerge when individuals must simultaneously honor their ancestral heritage and integrate meaningfully into communities where their traditions, beliefs, and cultural practices mark them as perpetually different from the assumed norm. Kyle's Jewish identity operates not as a superficial characteristic that occasionally surfaces for plot convenience, but as a fundamental aspect of his worldview that shapes his moral reasoning, influences his social relationships, and provides him with both sources of strength and occasions for conflict that require constant negotiation and conscious choice about how to maintain authenticity while pursuing acceptance and understanding from those whose backgrounds differ dramatically from his own. The religious landscape of South Park presents Kyle with unique challenges that illuminate broader questions about pluralism, tolerance, and the possibility of genuine community across lines of difference that have historically generated suspicion, misunderstanding, and sometimes outright hostility between groups whose beliefs and practices reflect fundamentally different approaches to understanding divine reality and human purpose. As the only consistently observant Jewish child among his peer group and one of very few Jewish families within the broader South Park community, Kyle must navigate daily interactions with friends, teachers, and neighbors whose assumptions about normal religious practice center on Christian traditions and celebrations that feel foreign to his own spiritual formation and family customs. This religious minority status creates ongoing opportunities for education and bridge building, while also generating moments of isolation and conflict that test Kyle's commitment to both interfaith friendship and religious authenticity. Kyle's approach to his Jewish identity reflects remarkable maturity and sophistication as he learns to distinguish between essential elements of his faith that deserve protection and preservation and peripheral customs or practices that can be adapted or temporarily set aside in service of larger goals like maintaining friendships or participating in community activities that serve important social functions, even when they do not align perfectly with his religious background. This discernment enables Kyle to remain true to his core beliefs, while also demonstrating flexibility and openness that facilitate positive relationships with non-Jewish peers who might otherwise feel excluded from his life or threatened by religious differences they do not understand. His balanced approach to religious identity serves as a model for how minority communities can maintain their distinctive characteristics while also contributing meaningfully to broader social conversations and collaborative efforts that benefit everyone regardless of their particular faith. Commitments. The annual conflict between Christmas and Hanukkah celebrations provides Kyle with recurring opportunities to articulate his religious identity while also grappling with questions about inclusion, representation, and the proper relationship between majority and minority cultures within democratic societies that claim to value diversity while often defaulting to practices that privilege dominant groups. Kyle's responses to Christmas-centered school activities, community celebrations, and peer conversations reveal his growing sophistication in advocating for inclusive approaches that honor multiple traditions without requiring anyone to abandon their own beliefs or conform to religious practices that conflict with their consciences. His efforts to educate others about Jewish holidays and customs serve both to increase understanding and to claim rightful space for his own tradition within community celebrations that too often assume universal participation in Christian observances. The development of Kyle's relationship with Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh represents one of the series' most creative solutions to the challenge of religious inclusion during holiday seasons, as this unusual character provides Kyle with a way to participate in Christmas joy and community celebration while maintaining his Jewish identity and avoiding the theological contradictions that would arise from embracing specifically Christian elements of the holiday. Mr. Hanky serves as Kyle's personal bridge between his religious background and the seasonal festivities that surround him, enabling him to share in the warmth and generosity that characterize the best aspects of Christmas while remaining true to his own spiritual commitments and family traditions. This creative solution demonstrates Kyle's ability to find inclusive approaches to potentially divisive situations, while also revealing the community's capacity to accommodate different perspectives when individuals are willing to work together toward mutual understanding and respect. Kyle's encounters with anti-Semitism throughout the series provide him with direct experience of religious prejudice, while also creating opportunities for him to develop responses that combine principled resistance with educational outreach designed to address ignorance and fear that fuel discriminatory attitudes and behaviors. Whether facing Cartman's crude stereotypes and hateful rhetoric, or confronting more sophisticated forms of prejudice embedded in community institutions and social assumptions, Kyle consistently demonstrates courage in defending his identity, while also showing remarkable patience and persistence in trying to help others understand the humanity that connects all people regardless of their religious backgrounds or cultural practices. His responses to prejudice reflect his growing understanding that hatred often stems from ignorance and fear rather than genuine malice, and that education and relationship building can sometimes transform enemies into allies when approached with appropriate strategy and sustained commitment. The theological questions that Kyle wrestles with throughout his development reveal his serious engagement with religious faith as more than cultural identity or family tradition, but as a framework for understanding fundamental questions about divine purpose, human responsibility, and the proper relationship between individual conscience and community obligation. His occasional crises of faith, moments of doubt, and periods of questioning demonstrate healthy spiritual development rather than religious weakness, as genuine faith requires ongoing examination and conscious choice rather than blind acceptance of inherited beliefs without personal understanding or commitment. Kyle's willingness to struggle with difficult theological questions while maintaining his fundamental religious identity shows maturity and authenticity that commands respect from both religious and secular perspectives. Kyle's experience of being Jewish in a predominantly Christian environment teaches him valuable lessons about minority psychology and the skills necessary for maintaining group identity while participating fully in broader social and political life that may not always accommodate or understand minority perspectives and needs. These lessons prove valuable beyond religious contexts, as Kyle encounters other forms of difference and marginalization throughout his development, enabling him to empathize with others who face discrimination or exclusion based on characteristics that mark them as different from dominant group norms and expectations. His religious minority status provides him with insights into power dynamics, privilege, and the importance of inclusive institutions that serve all community members, rather than simply those whose backgrounds align with historical majorities. The relationship between Kyle's Jewish identity and his strong sense of social justice reflects the deep connections within Jewish tradition between religious faith and ethical responsibility that emphasize the obligation to work for justice and compassion in the world, rather than focusing exclusively on personal salvation or individual spiritual development. This tradition of social engagement influences Kyle's approach to community problems and political issues, as he consistently demonstrates concern for vulnerable populations and commitment to systemic solutions that address root causes of suffering rather than simply providing temporary relief for symptoms. His activism and advocacy work reflect his understanding that authentic religious faith requires engagement with social and political realities, rather than retreat into private spirituality that ignores collective responsibilities and community obligations. Kyle's navigation of dietary restrictions, Sabbath observance, and other religious practices within the social context of elementary school friendships and activities demonstrates his growing ability to honor his religious commitments while also maintaining relationships that require flexibility, mutual accommodation from all parties involved. His approach to these practical challenges reveals wisdom beyond his years, as he learns to communicate his needs clearly while also showing respect for others' different practices and beliefs, creating possibilities for mutual understanding and shared experiences that honor everyone's dignity while acknowledging real differences in values and commitments. These everyday negotiations provide Kyle with valuable skills in diplomacy and compromise that serve him well in many other contexts throughout his development. The evolution of Kyle's understanding of Jewish history and its relevance to contemporary social and political issues provides him with historical perspective that enriches his analysis of current events while also connecting him to a larger story of struggle, survival, and contribution that extends far beyond his individual experience or family background. His growing awareness of Jewish contributions to science, philosophy, arts, and social reform movements helps him develop pride in his heritage, while also recognizing the responsibilities that come with inheriting a tradition that has consistently emphasized education, ethical behavior, and commitment to improving the world for all people, rather than simply advancing narrow group interests. Kyle's relationship with Israel and questions about Jewish nationalism versus universal human rights reflects his growing sophistication in understanding how religious and ethnic identity intersect with political questions in ways that require careful analysis and principled decision-making rather than automatic loyalty to any particular political position or national agenda. His approach to these complex issues demonstrates his commitment to applying universal ethical principles consistently, rather than allowing tribal loyalties to override his commitment to justice and human rights for all people regardless of their religious or ethnic backgrounds. This principled approach sometimes creates tensions within his own community, while also earning respect from those who appreciate moral consistency over political convenience. The interfaith relationships that Kyle develops throughout the series provide him with opportunities to learn from other religious traditions, while also sharing insights from his own background that enrich others' understanding of spirituality and ethical living. His friendships with Stan, Kenny, and even his complex relationship with Cartman demonstrate his ability to maintain deep connections across religious lines, while also being honest about differences that matter to him personally and that shape his approach to important life decisions. These relationships serve as models for how religious diversity can strengthen rather than threaten community cohesion when approached with openness, respect, and commitment to understanding, rather than conversion or compromise of essential beliefs. Kyle's role as religious educator within his peer group emerges naturally from his willingness to share information about Jewish beliefs and practices when appropriate opportunities arise, combined with his growing communication skills and his commitment to dispelling misconceptions and stereotypes that create barriers to understanding and friendship. His educational efforts focus on building bridges rather than highlighting differences, emphasizing shared values and common concerns, while also acknowledging distinctive aspects of Jewish tradition that contribute to the rich diversity of American religious life. His approach to interfaith education demonstrates respect for others' autonomy and intelligence, while also claiming rightful recognition for his own tradition's wisdom and contributions. The challenges that Kyle faces in reconciling religious particularism with universal moral principles reflect broader tensions within all religious traditions between loyalty to specific communities and commitment to justice and compassion for all human beings, regardless of their group affiliations or personal characteristics. His growing ability to maintain both strong Jewish identity and inclusive moral vision demonstrates the possibility of religious commitment that strengthens rather than undermines commitment to universal human rights and social justice, that transcends tribal boundaries and serves the common good of all people who share the planet and depend on each other for survival and flourishing. Kyle's experience of religious holidays and life cycle events within the context of his South Park friendships provides him with opportunities to share the richness of Jewish tradition, while also creating space for others to participate in ways that honor both his religious commitments and their own spiritual journeys and family backgrounds. These celebrations serve as occasions for education and relationship building that demonstrate how religious differences can become sources of mutual enrichment rather than division when approached with appropriate sensitivity and genuine desire for understanding and connection across lines of difference that might otherwise create barriers to friendship and community cooperation. The legacy that Kyle creates through his thoughtful engagement with Jewish identity in pluralistic settings demonstrates how minority religious communities can contribute to broader social conversations while maintaining their distinctive characteristics and commitments that provide meaning and direction for their members' lives and spiritual development. His example shows that authentic religious identity requires neither isolation from broader community nor compromise of essential beliefs, but rather thoughtful engagement that honors both particular traditions and universal human values that connect all people regardless of their specific religious backgrounds or spiritual practices. In the quiet moments of prayer and reflection that connect Kyle to generations of Jewish wisdom and spiritual seeking, we see how religious identity provides not only personal meaning, but also resources for contributing to community life in ways that serve justice, promote understanding, and demonstrate the possibilities for unity within diversity that represent the highest aspirations of democratic societies committed to honoring both individual conscience and collective welfare. In the vast spectrum of human heroism, where courage manifests in countless forms from grand gestures of self-sacrifice to quiet acts of daily protection and advocacy, Kyle Broflovsky's emergence as guardian and protector represents a particularly compelling study in how moral conviction transforms into active intervention on behalf of those who cannot defend themselves against the various forms of, quote, injustice, exploitation, and harm that threaten vulnerable members of every community. Kyle's heroic development occurs not through sudden revelation or dramatic origin story, but through the gradual accumulation of experiences that reveal his fundamental inability to remain passive when confronted with suffering that he possesses the power to prevent or alleviate. This evolution from concerned observer to active protector reflects the natural progression of someone whose intellectual gifts and moral sensitivity create both the ability to recognize problems that others miss and the sense of problems responsibility that compels intervention even when such action requires personal sacrifice or social conflict. The foundation of Kyle's protective instincts reveals itself most clearly in his evolving relationship with his younger brother Ike, whose vulnerability and dependence create the perfect laboratory for Kyle to develop and refine the caregiving skills that will eventually extend to encompass his entire community and beyond. The transformation of Kyle's attitude toward Ike from the casual cruelty of kick the baby to the fierce protectiveness that characterizes their later relationship demonstrates how genuine love emerges through conscious choice and sustained commitment rather than automatic biological programming or social expectation. Kyle's growing recognition of his responsibility toward Ike teaches him fundamental lessons about the relationship between power and obligation, privilege and duty that will inform all his future heroic actions and advocacy efforts. Kyle's protection of Ike operates on multiple levels simultaneously, encompassing not only physical safety from immediate dangers, but also emotional security from psychological harm, educational support for intellectual development, and moral guidance during periods of confusion or poor judgment that could create lasting negative consequences. Episodes like Miss Teacher Bangs a Boy reveal Kyle's sophisticated understanding of inappropriate adult behavior and his willingness to intervene in situations where other adults fail to recognize or address genuine threats to child welfare. His persistence in pursuing protection for Ike, despite resistance from authority figures and social pressure to remain silent, demonstrates the courage that authentic heroism requires and the moral clarity that enables effective intervention in complex situations where right and wrong may not be immediately obvious to casual observers. The expansion of Kyle's protective instincts beyond his immediate family to encompass classmates, friends, and eventually broader community members reflects his growing understanding that heroism cannot be limited by personal relationships or tribal loyalties, but must extend to all individuals who face threats they cannot handle independently. His interventions on behalf of Butterscotch during various episodes demonstrate his evolution from someone who participated in the casual bullying and exploitation of vulnerable peers to someone who recognizes such behavior as morally unacceptable, regardless of social norms or peer pressure that might make cruelty seem normal or acceptable. This transformation reveals Kyle's developing ability to resist social conformity when it conflicts with his moral principles and his growing confidence in his own judgment about right and wrong. Kyle's approach to defending underdogs and marginalized individuals reflects sophisticated understanding of power dynamics and systemic inequalities that enable some people to harm others with relative impunity while leaving victims with few resources for self-protection or justice-seeking. His willingness to challenge authority figures, popular students, and even adult institutions, when they fail to protect vulnerable individuals, demonstrates remarkable courage and moral clarity that transcends typical childhood concerns about social acceptance and peer approval. Kyle's advocacy efforts reveal his recognition that genuine protection requires not only immediate intervention during crisis situations, but also systematic efforts to address underlying causes of vulnerability and exploitation that create ongoing threats to those who lack power or resources. For effective self-defense, the creation of Kyle's superhero persona as the human kite represents the culmination of his heroic development and his conscious choice to formalize his commitment to community protection through the adoption of a symbolic identity that enables more effective intervention while also inspiring others to recognize their own responsibilities for collective welfare and mutual aid. The human kite persona provides Kyle with both practical advantages for heroic action and psychological benefits that help him maintain the emotional distance and strategic thinking necessary for effective crisis response without becoming overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the situations he encounters or the personal risks that heroic action sometimes requires. The symbolic significance of Kyle's choice to represent himself as a kite reflects deep understanding of heroism as action that lifts others towards safety and possibility, while remaining connected to community through relationships that provide both support and accountability. The kite metaphor suggests Kyle's recognition that effective heroism requires both the ability to rise above immediate circumstances, to gain broader perspective, and the wisdom to remain grounded in relationships and responsibilities that prevent heroic action from becoming mere ego, gratification, or adventure-seeking divorced from genuine service to others' welfare. His superhero identity enables Kyle to channel his protective instincts more effectively, while also maintaining the humility and community connection that authentic heroism requires. Kyle's heroic methodology reveals sophisticated understanding of intervention strategies that maximize positive outcomes while minimizing unintended consequences that could harm the very people his actions aim to protect. Rather than relying solely on physical confrontation or dramatic gestures that might create more problems than they solve, Kyle typically approaches heroic situations with careful analysis of underlying causes, systematic consideration of multiple possible responses, and strategic implementation of solutions that address root problems rather than simply treating surface symptoms. This thoughtful approach to heroism reflects his intellectual gifts and moral sophistication, while also demonstrating his recognition that good intentions alone cannot justify actions that might ultimately cause more harm than benefit to those they purport to help. The personal costs that Kyle accepts in pursuit of heroic action reveal the depth of his commitment to justice and protection that transcends self-interest or concern for personal comfort and social acceptance. His willingness to face social ostracism, physical danger, and emotional trauma in service of others' welfare demonstrates authentic moral courage, rather than mere thrill-seeking or attention-getting behavior. that might motivate less genuine forms of heroic posturing. Kyle's heroism emerges from genuine concern for others' suffering combined with confident belief in his ability to make meaningful, positive differences through sustained effort and strategic action, rather than from desire for recognition or excitement that might lead to reckless or counterproductive intervention attempts. Kyle's understanding of the relationship between individual heroic action and systematic social change becomes increasingly sophisticated as his experience accumulates, and his analysis of community problems deepens through exposure to recurring patterns of injustice and exploitation that require more than episodic intervention to address effectively. His growing recognition that genuine protection requires not only immediate crisis response, but also long-term efforts to change institutions, attitudes, and power structures that create ongoing vulnerability for those who lack resources or advocates, demonstrates his evolution from reactive heroism to proactive social leadership that addresses underlying causes rather than simply responding to their most obvious manifestations. The way Kyle balances heroic action with normal childhood development and social relationships reveals his remarkable ability to maintain perspective and proportion while pursuing justice and protection for others without becoming consumed by heroic identity or losing connection to the personal relationships and developmental experiences that provide meaning and joy beyond the satisfactions of successful intervention and advocacy. His continued participation in typical childhood activities and maintenance of friendships with peers who do not share his heroic calling demonstrate healthy integration of heroic identity with broader personal development that enables sustained commitment to protection and service without the burnout or isolation that often affect individuals whose entire identity becomes centered on crisis response and emergency intervention. Kyle's heroic actions during South Park's various supernatural and extraordinary crises reveal his ability to maintain moral clarity and effective judgment, even when confronted with situations that transcend normal experience and challenge fundamental assumptions about reality, possibility, and human agency. Whether facing alien invasions, supernatural threats, or cosmic-level disasters that threaten not only individual welfare, but the continued existence of his entire community, Kyle consistently demonstrates the psychological resilience and moral courage necessary for effective leadership during extreme circumstances, when others become paralyzed by fear or overwhelmed by the magnitude of challenges that seem to exceed human capacity for understanding or response. The collaborative aspects of Kyle's heroism reflect his recognition that effective protection and positive social change require cooperation and coordination among multiple individuals who share commitment to justice and collective welfare rather than relying solely on individual action or isolated intervention that might lack the resources or perspective necessary for addressing complex problems that affect entire communities. His ability to work effectively with others who share his values, while also maintaining his individual identity and moral autonomy, demonstrates sophisticated leadership skills that enable him to inspire and coordinate group efforts without becoming either dictatorial in his approach or passive in his personal commitment to active intervention when situations require immediate response. Kyle's relationship with violence as a tool for protection reveals his careful consideration of when physical force serves legitimate defensive purposes versus when it becomes counterproductive aggression that escalates conflicts, rather than resolving them in ways that promote long-term safety and justice for all affected parties. His general preference for non-violent solutions, combined with his willingness to use appropriate force when necessary to protect vulnerable individuals from immediate harm, demonstrates mature understanding of proportionate response and strategic thinking that maximizes protection while minimizing unnecessary escalation or collateral damage that might ultimately harm innocent people or undermine broader goals of community safety and social justice. The educational dimensions of Kyle's heroic work reveal his understanding that genuine protection requires not only immediate intervention during crisis situations, but also ongoing efforts to increase awareness, build skills, and change attitudes that contribute to vulnerability and exploitation within his community. His willingness to teach others about recognizing and responding to various forms of harm demonstrates his recognition that sustainable protection requires broad-based community capacity rather than dependence on individual heroes who cannot be present during every crisis or available to address every threat that community members might face in their daily lives. Kyle's evolving understanding of the psychological dimensions of heroic work reflects his growing awareness that effective protection requires not only external action to address threats and injustices, but also internal work to maintain the emotional stability, moral clarity, and spiritual resources necessary for sustained commitment to difficult and sometimes dangerous work that exposes him regularly to human suffering and systemic injustice that could easily lead to cynicism or despair without appropriate coping strategies and support systems. The legacy that Kyle creates through his heroic actions extends beyond the immediate benefits that his interventions provide to specific individuals in particular situations to encompass broader cultural changes that make protection and mutual aid more normal and expected within his community, rather than exceptional behaviors that depend on the presence of unusually committed individuals. His modeling of active intervention and advocacy work inspires others to recognize their own responsibilities for collective welfare, while also demonstrating that heroic action remains accessible to ordinary individuals who choose to develop their capabilities and commit their resources to serving others' needs rather than focusing exclusively on personal advancement or individual satisfaction. Kyle's heroic journey demonstrates that authentic protection emerges not from superhuman abilities or special destiny, but from the conscious choice to use whatever capabilities one possesses in service of others' welfare, combined with the sustained commitment to developing greater skills, wisdom, and effectiveness in addressing the various forms of harm and injustice that threaten community members who cannot protect themselves adequately through individual effort alone. His example shows that heroism represents not extraordinary deviation from normal human possibility, but rather the full development and proper application of moral and intellectual gifts that many individuals possess, but few choose to cultivate and deploy consistently in service of collective welfare and social justice. In the quiet moments between crises, when Kyle reflects on the costs and rewards of his commitment to protection and service, we witness the profound satisfaction that emerges from using one's life in service of purposes larger than personal comfort or individual achievement, while also recognizing the ongoing challenges and responsibilities that such commitment creates for those who choose to serve as guardians and protectors within communities that desperately need individuals willing to sacrifice personal ease for others' safety and welfare. In the delicate choreography of human emotional development, where the transition from childhood innocence to adolescent complexity creates opportunities for both profound growth and devastating disappointment, Kyle Broflovsky's journey through love, loss, and the gradual awakening of mature consciousness represents one of animation's most nuanced explorations of how individuals navigate the treacherous waters between idealism and reality, while maintaining their essential humanity, despite repeated encounters with heartbreak, betrayal, and the countless small deaths that accompany the process of growing up. Kyle's emotional evolution unfolds not through dramatic revelations or sudden transformations, but through the accumulation of experiences that gradually teach him the difference between the world as he wishes it could be and the world as it actually exists, forcing him to develop new capacities for resilience, forgiveness, and hope that enable him to continue pursuing meaningful connections and worthwhile goals despite abundant evidence that such pursuits often end in frustration and pain. The romantic dimensions of Kyle's emotional development reveal his capacity for deep feeling and genuine vulnerability that contrast sharply with the intellectual confidence and moral certainty that characterize his approach to most other aspects of life and social interaction. His early romantic interests, from his childhood crush on his teacher to his more serious attractions to classmates like Kelly and Nicole, demonstrate his ability to open his heart completely to another person, while also revealing his inexperience with the complex dynamics of mutual attraction, relationship maintenance, and the inevitable disappointments that accompany even the most promising romantic connections. When reality fails to match the idealized expectations that naturally emerge during the early stages of infatuation and emotional attachment. Kyle's relationship with Kelly during the rainforest adventure represents perhaps his most significant early experience with genuine romantic love and the profound vulnerability that such feelings create for individuals who have previously maintained emotional distance as protection against the risks that deep connection always entails. The intensity of his feelings for Kelly, combined with his willingness to sacrifice his own safety for her protection, reveals depths of emotional capacity that surprise both Kyle himself and those who know him primarily through his intellectual achievements and moral advocacy, rather than through intimate personal relationships that require different forms of courage and different types of wisdom than those necessary for academic success or social leadership. The tragic brevity of Kyle's relationship with Kelly teaches him crucial lessons about the fragility of love and the reality that even the most meaningful connections can be disrupted by circumstances beyond anyone's control, preparing him for future experiences with loss, while also establishing patterns of hope and resilience that enable him to continue opening himself to romantic possibility despite the pain that such openness inevitably creates when relationships end through death, distance, or simple incompatibility. His ability to process this loss without becoming cynical about love demonstrates remarkable emotional maturity and suggests that his capacity for deep feeling serves as strength rather than weakness in navigating the challenges that adult relationships will eventually present. The impact of puberty and adolescence on Kyle's emotional landscape creates new complexities and challenges that test his previous assumptions about himself and his relationships, while introducing physical and psychological changes that require ongoing adaptation and self-discovery. His growing awareness of his own sexuality and romantic desires operates within the context of his established friendships and family relationships, creating potential conflicts and complications that require careful navigation to maintain important connections, while also honoring his developing identity and changing needs as he matures from child into young adult with increasingly sophisticated understanding of intimacy and partnership. Kyle's struggles with self-image and physical appearance during adolescence reveal vulnerabilities that contrast with his intellectual confidence and moral certainty, demonstrating that even individuals with strong internal resources and supportive family environments must wrestle with insecurity and self-doubt during periods of rapid physical and emotional change. Episodes like The List expose Kyle's deep sensitivity about his attractiveness and social desirability, showing how external validation can become disproportionately important, even for individuals whose self-worth should theoretically derive from more substantial sources like character, intelligence, and moral integrity, rather than superficial characteristics that reflect genetic inheritance, rather than personal achievement or conscious choice. The crisis that Kyle experiences upon learning his ranking on the girls' attractiveness list demonstrates how adolescent insecurity can temporarily overwhelm rational thinking and moral judgment, leading to destructive impulses and self-defeating behavior that threaten both individual well-being and important relationships with others who care deeply about his welfare and success. His contemplation of burning down the school reveals the intensity of his emotional pain, while also showing how wounded pride and damaged self-concept can create dangerous impulses toward revenge and destruction that serve no constructive purpose, while potentially causing enormous harm to innocent people who bear no responsibility for his suffering. However, Kyle's ultimate decision to burn the real list without reading it demonstrates his growth in emotional wisdom and his developing understanding that some forms of knowledge create more problems than they solve, while true self-worth must emerge from internal sources rather than external validation that remains forever subject to the opinions and preferences of others whose judgments may reflect their own limitations rather than objective assessments of genuine worth and value. This choice reveals Kyle's increasing sophistication in managing his emotional responses and his growing ability to make decisions based on long-term well-being rather than immediate emotional impulses that might provide temporary satisfaction while creating lasting negative consequences. Kyle's experiences with disappointment and failure throughout his development teach him essential lessons about resilience and the importance of maintaining hope and effort, even when outcomes fail to match expectations or when circumstances create obstacles that seem insurmountable through individual effort alone. His academic setbacks, social conflicts, and romantic disappointments provide opportunities for developing coping strategies and psychological resources that enable him to bounce back from defeats while maintaining his commitment to important goals and values, even when pursuit of those goals requires sustained effort, without guaranteed success or recognition. The way Kyle processes and integrates painful experiences reveals his natural tendency towards self-reflection and analysis that serves him well in learning from mistakes, while avoiding the trap of excessive rumination or self-blame that can prevent individuals from moving forward constructively after experiencing setbacks or failures. His ability to acknowledge his own contributions to problems, while also recognizing external factors beyond his control, demonstrates mature understanding of responsibility and agency that enables appropriate self-correction without destructive self-punishment or paralyzing guilt that might prevent future effort and growth. Kyle's relationship with loss extends beyond romantic disappointment to encompass his experiences with death, separation, and the various forms of ending that characterize human existence and create ongoing challenges for individuals who must learn to love deeply while accepting the reality that all relationships and experiences remain temporary and subject to forces beyond human control or prediction. His responses to Kenny's deaths, family conflicts, and the dissolution of friendships reveal his developing capacity for grief and mourning that honors what has been lost, while also maintaining openness to new connections and experiences that might provide different forms of meaning and satisfaction. The emotional maturity that Kyle develops through processing loss and disappointment manifests itself in his increasing ability to support others who face similar challenges while drawing on his own experiences to provide comfort and guidance without minimizing their pain or offering superficial reassurance that fails to acknowledge the reality of their suffering. His growing skill as emotional counselor and supportive friend reflects his transformation of personal pain into wisdom and compassion that benefits not only himself, but also those who have the privilege of receiving his care, understanding during their own difficult periods. Kyle's evolving understanding of the relationship between emotion and reason becomes increasingly sophisticated as he learns that feelings provide important information about values and needs, while also recognizing that emotional impulses require evaluation and sometimes regulation through conscious thought and deliberate choice rather than automatic expression that might create problems or harm relationships that matter deeply to him. This integration of emotional awareness with rational analysis enables Kyle to make decisions that honor both his feelings and his principles, while considering the potential consequences of various choices for himself and others who might be affected by his actions. The balance that Kyle develops between emotional vulnerability and self-protection reflects his growing wisdom about the appropriate level of openness and investment in different relationships and situations, recognizing that authentic connection requires willingness to risk hurt, while also maintaining enough emotional reserve to cope with disappointment and loss when they inevitably occur. His increasing skill in reading social situations and assessing the reliability and intentions of others enables him to invest appropriately in relationships while avoiding both excessive guardedness that prevents genuine connection, naive openness that leaves him vulnerable to exploitation or manipulation by those whose motives may be less than honorable. Kyle's capacity for forgiveness emerges as one of his most admirable emotional qualities, enabling him to maintain relationships and community connections, despite inevitable conflicts and disappointments that could easily justify permanent resentment or withdrawal from social engagement. His ability to distinguish between forgiving harmful behavior and enabling its continuation demonstrates sophisticated understanding of boundaries and appropriate consequences, while maintaining hope for positive change and growth in relationships that have been damaged by poor choices or temporary failures in judgment or character. The empathy that Kyle develops through his own experiences with emotional pain enables him to recognize and respond to suffering in others with genuine understanding and practical support, rather than mere sympathy or abstract concern that fails to translate into meaningful assistance or comfort. His growing ability to perceive others' emotional needs and respond appropriately reflects his integration of personal experience with moral commitment and practical wisdom that makes him an invaluable friend and community member, whose presence provides both stability and inspiration for those who struggle with their own challenges and disappointments. Kyle's relationship with hope represents perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his emotional development, as he maintains optimism about human potential and possibility despite repeated exposure to cruelty, disappointment, and the various forms of harm that people inflict on each other through selfishness, ignorance, or malicious intent. His ability to continue believing in the possibility of positive change, meaningful relationships, and worthwhile achievements reflects not naive denial of negative realities, but rather conscious choice to focus on potential rather than limitation, on possibility rather than past failure, on what could be rather than what has been. The emotional legacy that Kyle creates through his journey from childhood innocence through adolescent turmoil toward mature wisdom, demonstrates that growth requires both the courage to feel deeply and the wisdom to learn from painful experiences without becoming hardened or cynical about the potential for joy, love, and meaningful connection that make life worth living despite its inevitable disappointments and losses. His example shows that emotional maturity emerges not from avoiding pain, but from processing it constructively, while maintaining openness to new experiences that might provide different forms of fulfillment and meaning than those that have been lost or proven unattainable. Kyle's continuing capacity for wonder, excitement, and genuine pleasure in simple experiences reveals that emotional sophistication need not diminish appreciation for life's basic gifts and daily opportunities for connection, discovery, and growth that remain available even during difficult periods when larger goals seem distant or impossible to achieve. His ability to find meaning and satisfaction in present moments while working toward future possibilities demonstrates the integration of acceptance and aspiration that characterizes emotionally healthy individuals who have learned to live fully within current reality, while maintaining hope for positive change and continued development. In the quiet moments of reflection, when Kyle contemplates the journey from childhood dreams through adolescent struggles toward adult understanding, we witness the profound transformation that occurs when individuals choose growth over stagnation, courage over safety, and love over self-protection, recognizing that emotional maturity represents not the absence of feeling, but rather its appropriate expression in service of values and relationships that provide meaning and purpose beyond individual satisfaction or temporary pleasure. In the annals of literary rivalry and philosophical opposition, few relationships achieve the complexity, intensity, and enduring fascination of the eternal conflict between Kyle Broflovsky and Eric Cartman, a dynamic so rich in psychological depth and moral significance that it transcends simple childhood antagonism to become a profound exploration of the fundamental tensions that exist within human nature itself and the irreconcilable differences between worldviews that prioritize collective welfare versus individual gratification, universal justice versus personal advantage, and authentic moral conviction versus manipulative self-interest disguised as principled behavior. Their relationship operates as a microcosm of broader ideological struggles that have shaped human history, with Kyle representing the voice of conscience, social responsibility, and ethical reasoning, while Cartman embodies the forces of narcissism, exploitation, and moral relativism that consistently threaten to undermine the social contracts and shared values that make civilized community life possible in the face of natural human tendencies towards selfishness and tribal competition. The psychological foundations of Kyle and Cartman's mutual antagonism extend far beyond simple personality conflicts or childhood grudges to encompass fundamental differences in their approaches to understanding human relationships, social obligations, and the proper balance between individual desires and collective needs that reflect competing philosophical traditions and moral frameworks that have divided thinkers and communities throughout recorded history. Kyle's commitment to justice, fairness, and the equal treatment of all individuals, regardless of their social status or personal characteristics, stands in direct opposition to Cartman's belief that strength, cunning, and ruthless pursuit of advantage represent not only acceptable but actually superior approaches to navigating social relationships and achieving personal goals within competitive environments where resources remain limited and conflicts of interest inevitably emerge. These opposing worldviews create natural friction that manifests itself through countless disagreements, arguments, and elaborate conflicts that reveal the depth of their philosophical differences, while also demonstrating their grudging respect for each other's intelligence and determination, even as they remain fundamentally incapable of finding common ground on issues that matter most deeply to both of them. Kyle's analytical approach to problem solving and his commitment to solutions that serve everyone's interests conflicts sharply with Cartman's strategic thinking that focuses exclusively on maximizing his own benefits, while minimizing costs to himself regardless of consequences for others who might be harmed by his choices and actions. The intellectual dimensions of their rivalry prove particularly fascinating because both Kyle and Cartman possess considerable mental abilities and creative capacities, but they channel these gifts toward completely different purposes that reflect their opposing moral orientations and value systems. Kyle deploys his analytical skills, persuasive abilities, and strategic thinking in service of identifying problems that affect his community and developing solutions that address root causes while promoting greater justice and collective welfare for all affected parties. Cartman uses his considerable intelligence, manipulative talents, and psychological insights to exploit others' weaknesses, advance his personal agenda at any cost, and create elaborate deceptions that serve his immediate desires, without regard for long-term consequences or the harm such schemes might cause to innocent people who become collateral damage in his pursuit of power, pleasure, or social advantage. The escalation of their conflicts throughout the series demonstrates how ideological opposition can intensify over time when fundamental differences remain unresolved and each party becomes more sophisticated in articulating and defending their positions, while also developing more effective strategies for undermining their opponent's influence and credibility. Early seasons feature relatively simple disagreements and childish insults that gradually evolve into complex psychological warfare and elaborate schemes that require considerable planning, resources, and sustained commitment to execute successfully, revealing the depth of their mutual obsession and their willingness to invest enormous energy in defeating each other rather than finding ways to coexist peacefully despite their differences. Episodes like the Imagination Land trilogy showcase both the extremity of their conflict and the strange codependency that develops between sworn enemies who understand each other better than anyone else while remaining fundamentally incompatible in their values, goals, and approaches to relationships and social responsibility. Cartman's obsessive pursuit of Kyle's humiliation through increasingly elaborate and dangerous schemes reveals the extent to which their rivalry has become central to his identity and sense of purpose, while Kyle's passionate commitment to exposing and defeating Cartman's machinations demonstrates his recognition that allowing such behavior to succeed without opposition would represent betrayal of his own values and abandonment of his responsibility to protect vulnerable community members from exploitation and harm. The bet over leprechauns that drives the Imagination Land conflict illustrates perfectly how their philosophical differences can transform even trivial disagreements into epic battles that engage cosmic forces and threaten the fundamental structure of reality itself, suggesting that their opposition represents something deeper and more significant than simple personal animosity or childhood rivalry. Kyle's skeptical rationalism conflicts with Cartman's willingness to embrace convenient beliefs regardless of their truth value, creating epistemological tensions that extend far beyond the specific question of leprechaun existence to encompass broader questions about evidence, authority, and the proper relationship between belief and reality that have divided philosophers and communities throughout human history. Despite their mutual antagonism and the genuine harm that their conflicts sometimes create for themselves and innocent bystanders, Kyle and Cartman's relationship includes moments of unexpected cooperation and even grudging mutual support that reveal the complexity of their bond and the ways that shared experiences and common enemies can create temporary alliances between individuals whose fundamental differences would otherwise make any form of collaboration impossible. When external threats endanger their community or challenge their mutual friends, Kyle and Cartman occasionally demonstrate their ability to set aside their personal grievances and work together toward shared objectives. Though such cooperation typically proves fragile and temporary, as their basic incompatibility reasserts itself once immediate crises pass and their attention returns to their ongoing ideological struggle. These moments of alliance serve multiple narrative and psychological functions, providing relief from the intensity of their usual conflicts while also highlighting both the possibility of redemption and reconciliation within damaged relationships, and the reality that some differences run too deep to be permanently resolved through good intentions, shared experiences, or mutual recognition of each other's positive qualities and capabilities. Their temporary truces demonstrate that both Kyle and Cartman possess the capacity for growth and change that could theoretically enable lasting friendship, while their inevitable return to conflict reveals the profound challenges involved in overcoming fundamental differences in values and priorities that shape every aspect of how they understand themselves and their relationships with others. The manipulative strategies that Cartman employs in his conflicts with Kyle reveals sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation and emotional exploitation that would be impressive if applied to constructive purposes, but becomes deeply disturbing when directed toward harming someone whose only offense consists of maintaining moral principles and refusing to participate in schemes that would compromise his integrity or cause unnecessary suffering to innocent people. Cartman's ability to identify and exploit Kyle's emotional vulnerabilities, moral commitments, and psychological weaknesses demonstrates remarkable insight into human nature, combined with complete absence of empathy or concern for the destructive consequences his manipulations create for their targets and broader community. Episodes featuring Cartman's elaborate schemes to humiliate or defeat Kyle reveal the extent to which their rivalry has consumed his imagination and creative energy, as he invests enormous time and resources in developing increasingly complex plans that serve no constructive purpose beyond satisfying his desire for revenge and dominance over someone whose moral superiority represents a constant challenge to his narcissistic self-image and his belief that manipulation and exploitation represent acceptable and even superior approaches to achieving personal goals. The creativity and persistence that Cartman demonstrates in pursuing these schemes could accomplish remarkable positive outcomes if redirected toward constructive purposes, but his fundamental orientation towards zero-sum competition and his inability to derive satisfaction from mutual benefit or shared success prevent him from recognizing opportunities for collaboration that might serve both his benefit, interests, and Kyle's, while also contributing to broader community welfare. Kyle's responses to Cartman's manipulative tactics reveal his own psychological vulnerabilities and the ongoing challenges involved in maintaining moral principles while dealing with individuals whose behavior consistently violates basic norms of decency and reciprocity that make healthy relationships possible. His tendency to become emotionally reactive when confronted with Cartman's schemes sometimes leads him to make poor strategic choices that enable his opponent's success, while also compromising his own effectiveness as moral leader and community advocate. However, Kyle's ability to learn from these experiences and develop more sophisticated approaches to managing conflict with individuals who cannot be trusted or reasoned with demonstrates his growth in wisdom and emotional intelligence. Throughout the series, the ethical dilemmas that Kyle faces in his relationship with Cartman force him to wrestle with fundamental questions about appropriate responses to persistent harmful behavior from individuals who show no genuine interest in change or growth, creating tensions between his commitment to forgiveness and redemption and his responsibility to protect innocent people from exploitation and abuse. His struggle to balance compassion with accountability, hope for positive change with acceptance of current reality, and individual charity with collective welfare reflects broader challenges that communities face when dealing with members whose behavior consistently undermines shared values and social cohesion while taking advantage of others' goodwill and cooperative intentions. Kyle's evolution in his approach to managing conflict with Cartman demonstrates increasing sophistication in understanding the difference between enabling destructive behavior through misplaced compassion and maintaining appropriate boundaries that protect both individual dignity and community welfare while still leaving room for genuine repentance and positive change should such transformation ever occur. His growing ability to oppose harmful actions while avoiding personal hatred or desire for revenge reveals emotional and spiritual maturity that enables effective resistance to evil without becoming corrupted by the very forces he seeks to oppose. The community impact of Kyle and Cartman's ongoing conflict extends far beyond their individual relationship to influence broader social dynamics within South Park and serve as catalyst for various episodes and storylines that explore themes of justice, authority, social responsibility, and the challenges involved in maintaining civil discourse and productive disagreement within diverse communities where individuals hold strongly conflicting views about important issues. Their rivalry often forces other community members to choose sides or develop their own positions on moral and political questions that might otherwise remain unexamined or uncontested. The way other characters respond to Kyle and Cartman's conflicts reveals their own values and priorities while also demonstrating the ripple effects that ideological opposition can create within social networks where individuals must navigate relationships with people who hold incompatible views about fundamental questions of right and wrong. Some community members attempt to maintain neutrality or find middle ground between opposing positions, while others align themselves with one side or the other based on their own moral convictions or practical interests, creating complex webs of alliance and opposition that reflect broader patterns of social and political conflict within democratic societies. The comedic elements of Kyle and Cartman's rivalry serve important functions beyond simple entertainment, providing relief from the intensity of their moral and philosophical conflicts while also highlighting the absurdity and futility of certain forms of ideological combat that consume enormous energy and resources without producing constructive outcomes or meaningful progress toward resolving underlying disagreements. The humor that emerges from their conflicts often reveals the limitations and blind spots that both characters exhibit when their opposition becomes so consuming that they lose perspective on proportionality and the relative importance of different issues and goals. However, the series never allows comedy to obscure the genuine moral stakes involved in their conflict, or to suggest that their differences represent mere matters of opinion or personal preference, rather than fundamental disagreements about human dignity, social responsibility, and ethical behavior that have real consequences for real people who suffer when harmful ideologies gain influence and acceptance within communities that should protect and support all their members. The balance between humor and seriousness in their relationship reflects the series' broader approach to addressing important social and political issues through entertainment that engages audiences while also encouraging reflection and discussion about values and priorities that shape individual choices and collective policies. The long-term trajectory of Kyle and Cartman's relationship suggests that some forms of opposition may be permanent features of human experience, rather than temporary problems that can be resolved through better communication, increased understanding, or good faith efforts at compromise and collaboration. Their continuing conflict represents the eternal struggle between forces of construction and destruction, cooperation and exploitation, love and hatred that characterizes human existence at both individual and societal levels, reminding audiences that vigilance and active resistance remain necessary to protect values and institutions that promote justice and human flourishing against those who would corrupt or destroy them for personal advantage. The psychological complexity of their relationship prevents simple moral judgments about which character deserves sympathy or support, as both Kyle and Cartman exhibit admirable qualities alongside serious flaws and limitations that affect their ability to achieve their goals or maintain healthy relationships with others who might otherwise support their efforts or appreciate their contributions. Kyle's moral conviction and intellectual honesty provide essential leadership for his community, while his self-righteousness and tendency toward lecturing sometimes alienate potential allies and undermine his effectiveness as boulder, advocate, and teacher. Cartman's creativity and strategic thinking could contribute positively to community problem-solving efforts, but his narcissism and lack of empathy prevent him from recognizing opportunities for mutual benefit or shared achievement that might serve his interests, while also promoting collective welfare. In the endless dance of conflict and temporary reconciliation that characterizes Kyle and Cartman's relationship, we witness the perpetual human struggle between competing visions of good life and just society, recognizing that such conflicts serve essential functions in preventing complacency and moral stagnation, while also creating opportunities for growth, learning, and the ongoing refinement of values and priorities that enable individuals and communities to respond effectively to new challenges and changing circumstances that require fresh thinking and creative solutions. In the crucible of community crisis, where the comfortable assumptions of daily life dissolve under pressure and ordinary citizens must rise to extraordinary challenges that test their character, wisdom, and commitment to collective welfare, Kyle Broflovsky's emergence as a voice of moral clarity and practical leadership reveals the profound transformation that occurs when intellectual gifts combine with ethical conviction and emotional courage to create individuals capable of guiding entire communities through their darkest and most confusing moments. Kyle's role during South Park's various disasters, controversies, and social upheavals demonstrates how authentic leadership emerges not from official appointment or inherited privilege, but from the willingness to accept responsibility for outcomes that extend far beyond personal comfort and safety, while possessing the analytical capabilities and moral framework necessary to identify problems, develop solutions, and inspire others to work together toward shared goals that serve everyone's interests rather than advancing narrow partisan agendas or individual ambitions. The weight of community leadership that Kyle assumes during crisis situations reflects his recognition that intellectual gifts and moral sensitivity create obligations to serve others who may lack the resources, perspective, or confidence necessary to address complex challenges that threaten their welfare and security. His consistent willingness to step forward during emergencies and controversial situations demonstrates his understanding that democracy and community cohesion depend on individuals who prioritize collective welfare over personal convenience, while possessing the courage to make difficult decisions and advocate for unpopular positions when such advocacy serves important principles or protects vulnerable community members from harm or exploitation by those who would take advantage of confusion and fear to advance their own interests. Kyle's approach to crisis leadership reveals sophisticated understanding of how effective problem-solving requires both systematic analysis of underlying causes and strategic implementation of solutions that address root issues, rather than simply treating surface symptoms that may provide temporary relief while leaving fundamental problems unresolved and likely to resurface in different forms. His ability to maintain perspective during emotionally charged situations enables him to resist the pressure for immediate action that might feel satisfying but prove counterproductive, instead advocating for measured responses that consider long-term consequences and unintended effects that hasty interventions might create for innocent people who bear no responsibility for current problems but could suffer from poorly conceived solutions. The moral authority that Kyle commands during community crises emerges from his established reputation for integrity, consistency, and genuine concern for others' welfare, rather than from any official position or institutional backing that might provide external validation for his leadership role. Community members turn to Kyle for guidance not because they are required to do so by law or custom, but because his track record of principled behavior and effective problem-solving has earned their trust and respect in ways that cannot be achieved through manipulation, self-promotion, or political maneuvering. This authentic moral authority provides Kyle with influence and credibility that enable him to shape community responses to challenges that require collective action and shared sacrifice for successful resolution. Kyle's ability to unite diverse community members around common causes demonstrates remarkable skill in building coalitions that transcend traditional divisions of age, class, religion, and political affiliation. By focusing attention on shared interests and values that connect all residents, regardless of their differences, on other issues that might normally create conflict and competition. His success in fostering cooperation among individuals who might otherwise remain suspicious or hostile toward each other reflects his understanding that effective leadership requires appealing to people's better angels while also acknowledging their legitimate concerns and interests in ways that make collaboration feel beneficial rather than sacrificial or coercive. The communication strategies that Kyle employs during crisis situations reveal his growing sophistication in tailoring his messages to different audiences while maintaining consistency in core principles and objectives that provide coherence and direction for collective action. His ability to speak convincingly to children and adults, skeptics and believers, conservative and progressive community members, demonstrates his recognition that effective leadership requires understanding how different people process information and make decisions, enabling him to present arguments and appeals that resonate with various psychological types and cultural backgrounds without compromising his own integrity or diluting important messages that must be communicated clearly regardless of their popularity or immediate acceptance. The personal costs that Kyle accepts in pursuit of community welfare during crisis situations reveal the depth of his commitment to collective good that transcends self-interest or concern for personal reputation and social acceptance. His willingness to face criticism, social isolation, and even physical danger when advocating for positions that serve community interests, demonstrates authentic servant leadership rather than opportunistic behavior designed to advance his own status or influence within South Park's social hierarchy. These sacrifices reflect his mature understanding that genuine leadership often requires individuals to pay prices that others are unwilling or unable to bear in service of goals that benefit everyone, rather than simply those who possess the power or resources to protect themselves from negative consequences. Kyle's responses to different types of community crises reveal his versatility and adaptability in addressing challenges that require different forms of expertise, different types of intervention, and different approaches to building consensus and coordinating action among diverse stakeholders, with varying levels of knowledge, commitment, and capability, whether dealing with supernatural threats that challenge fundamental assumptions about reality, political conflicts that divide community members along ideological lines, or natural disasters that require practical coordination of relief efforts. Kyle consistently demonstrates his ability to analyze situations accurately, identify appropriate responses, and mobilize resources effectively while maintaining morale and hope during difficult periods when others might become overwhelmed or discouraged by the magnitude of challenges they face. The educational aspects of Kyle's crisis leadership reflect his recognition that sustainable solutions to community problems require not only immediate intervention to address urgent needs, but also long-term efforts to increase awareness, build skills, and change attitudes that contribute to vulnerability and dysfunction within social systems that should protect and support all community members. His willingness to invest time and energy in teaching others about underlying causes of problems and effective strategies for prevention demonstrates his understanding that authentic leadership involves creating capacity within communities, rather than fostering dependence on individual heroes who cannot be present during every crisis or available to address every challenge that might emerge in the future. Kyle's evolution from reactive crisis responder to proactive community organizer demonstrates his growing understanding that effective leadership requires anticipating problems before they reach crisis proportions and working systematically to address underlying conditions that create vulnerability and instability within communities that lack adequate preparation for predictable challenges. His development of early warning systems, prevention programs, and community resilience initiatives reflects his recognition that wise leadership focuses on reducing the likelihood and severity of future crises, rather than simply responding effectively to disasters that could have been prevented through appropriate foresight and preparation. The collaborative dimensions of Kyle's leadership style reveal his understanding that sustainable solutions to complex community problems require broad participation and shared ownership, rather than top-down directives that may lack the buy-in and ongoing support necessary for long-term success. His ability to facilitate group decision-making processes that honor diverse perspectives while maintaining focus on shared objectives demonstrates sophisticated understanding of democratic principles and participatory governance that enables communities to develop solutions that reflect their values and priorities, rather than imposing external solutions that may conflict with local culture and conditions. Kyle's relationship with other community leaders during crisis situations reveals his ability to work effectively within existing power structures, while also challenging authority figures when their decisions or behavior threaten community welfare or violate important principles of justice and fairness. His skill in navigating political dynamics and institutional relationships enables him to influence outcomes through appropriate channels while maintaining his independence and moral authority that depend on his reputation for integrity and genuine concern for collective welfare rather than personal advancement or partisan loyalty. The psychological challenges that Kyle faces as community leader during extended crisis periods demonstrate the emotional toll that sustained responsibility for others' welfare can exact on individuals who accept such burdens willingly, but must also maintain their own psychological health and spiritual resources to continue serving effectively over time. His ability to process stress, manage competing demands, and maintain hope and determination, despite repeated exposure to human suffering and institutional failure, reflects remarkable resilience and emotional maturity that enable him to serve as stabilizing force during chaotic periods when others become overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control or understanding. Kyle's learning and adaptation throughout various crisis experiences reveal his commitment to continuous improvement and his recognition that effective leadership requires ongoing reflection, self-criticism, and willingness to modify approaches based on new information and changing circumstances that may require different strategies or priorities than those that proved successful in previous situations. His ability to learn from mistakes without becoming paralyzed by perfectionism demonstrates healthy integration of confidence and humility that enables sustained effectiveness, while also modeling appropriate responses to failure and setbacks for others who look to him for guidance and inspiration. The long-term community impact of Kyle's crisis leadership extends beyond the immediate benefits of his interventions during specific emergencies to encompass broader cultural changes that make South Park more resilient, cohesive, and capable of addressing future challenges through collective action, rather than depending entirely on external assistance or individual heroics. His modeling of principled behavior, effective problem-solving, and genuine concern for others' welfare inspires community members to develop their own leadership capabilities, while also establishing norms and expectations that promote cooperation, mutual aid, and shared responsibility for collective welfare. Kyle's understanding of the relationship between individual character and community health becomes increasingly sophisticated as his leadership experience accumulates and his analysis of social problems deepens through exposure to recurring patterns of dysfunction and conflict that require not only immediate intervention, but also systematic efforts to address underlying cultural and structural factors that contribute to ongoing instability and vulnerability within communities that should provide security and support for all their members. His recognition that external changes must be accompanied by internal transformation reflects his growing wisdom about the complex relationships between personal virtue and social justice that require both individual commitment to ethical behavior and collective efforts to create institutions and norms that support rather than undermine human flourishing and moral development. The spiritual dimensions of Kyle's crisis leadership reveal his understanding that effective service to others requires not only practical skills and intellectual capabilities, but also access to sources of meaning and strength that transcend immediate circumstances and personal limitations, enabling sustained commitment to difficult work that often involves exposure to suffering, injustice, and the various forms of evil that threaten community welfare and individual dignity. His ability to maintain hope and determination despite repeated encounters with human weakness and systemic failure reflects his connection to values and purposes that provide resilience and motivation beyond what purely secular or self-interested approaches to leadership could sustain over time. The legacy that Kyle creates through his crisis leadership demonstrates how individual commitment to service can create positive changes that extend far beyond immediate circumstances to influence future generations and establish precedents that guide community responses to challenges that have not yet emerged, but will inevitably test the wisdom, courage, and solidarity that current leaders help to develop through their example and teaching. His leadership style and principles become part of South Park's cultural inheritance that shapes how future leaders understand their roles and responsibilities, while also creating expectations for public service that elevate community standards and promote greater accountability among those who seek positions of influence and authority. In the quiet moments of reflection between crises, when Kyle contemplates the weight of responsibility he has accepted and the ongoing challenges that await communities committed to justice and mutual support, we witness the profound satisfaction that emerges from using one's life in service of purposes larger than personal comfort, while also recognizing the ongoing work required to maintain and strengthen the social bonds that make civilized life possible in the face of forces that consistently threaten to divide communities and undermine the trust and cooperation that enable collective flourishing and shared prosperity for all members, regardless of their individual circumstances or capabilities. In the profound silence that follows the completion of any life's journey, where the accumulated weight of choices made and paths taken crystallizes into final assessment of what has been accomplished and what legacy remains for future generations to inherit and build upon. Kyle Broflovsky's transformation from childhood idealist to adult leader represents one of animation's most sophisticated explorations of how moral conviction and intellectual gifts can mature into wisdom that serves not only individual fulfillment, but also collective welfare and social progress that extends far beyond any single person's immediate sphere of influence. The post-COVID specials provide us with a glimpse into Kyle's adult years that reveals both the continuity and evolution of his character, showing how the fundamental qualities that defined his childhood development have been refined through decades of experience into capabilities and perspectives that enable him to address adult challenges while maintaining the essential moral clarity and commitment to justice that made him such a compelling figure during his elementary school years in the mountain town that shaped his understanding of community, responsibility, and the ongoing work required to create societies that honor human dignity and promote mutual flourishing. The adult Kyle who emerges in the post-COVID timeline presents a complex figure whose professional achievements and personal struggles reflect the ongoing tension between idealistic aspirations and practical limitations that characterizes the experience of individuals who maintain high standards for themselves and their communities, while also learning to accept the compromises and disappointments that inevitably accompany adult responsibility and engagement with institutions that operate according to logic and priorities that may conflict with personal values and moral convictions. His career path and lifestyle choices reveal how childhood experiences with leadership, crisis management, and community service have evolved into adult commitments that enable him to continue serving others while also pursuing personal goals and relationships that provide meaning and satisfaction beyond the public roles that connect him to broader social and political movements. Kyle's adult relationship with Stan Marsh demonstrates the remarkable durability of authentic friendship that survives decades of geographic separation, different life choices, and the various pressures that typically strain childhood bonds as individuals develop distinct identities and pursue divergent paths that may create distance and misunderstanding between people who once shared everything and assumed their connection would remain unchanged by time and circumstance. Their reunion following Kenny's death reveals both the enduring affection and mutual respect that anchors their relationship, and the ways that adult responsibilities and personal disappointments have created subtle barriers that require conscious effort to overcome if their friendship is to provide the support and companionship that both men need during this difficult period of loss and reflection. The investigation that Kyle initiates into Kenny's death reflects his continued commitment to protecting those he loves, while also demonstrating his mature understanding that genuine care sometimes requires uncomfortable confrontations with truth and the willingness to pursue answers even when such pursuit might reveal information that challenges comfortable assumptions or creates additional pain for those who prefer to avoid difficult realities. His systematic approach to uncovering the circumstances surrounding Kenny's apparent suicide reveals both his intellectual capabilities and his emotional investment in honoring Kenny's memory through ensuring that his death serves some meaningful purpose rather than simply representing another tragedy that the community processes briefly before returning to normal routines and concerns. Kyle's discovery of Kenny's temporal research project represents one of the most emotionally devastating revelations in his adult life, as he learns that his childhood friend had dedicated years of brilliant scientific work to developing technology that could repair the damage caused by their broken friendship and restore the bonds that had provided meaning and joy during their elementary school years. The sophistication of Kenny's research and the depth of his commitment to healing their relationship forces Kyle to confront uncomfortable truths about his own role in the dissolution of their childhood group and his failure to recognize Kenny's continued investment in their friendship, despite the distance and silence that had characterized their adult years. The guilt that Kyle experiences upon learning about Kenny's project reflects his mature capacity for self-reflection and accountability that enables him to acknowledge his contributions to problems without becoming paralyzed by shame or engaging in self-destructive behaviors that might provide temporary emotional relief while preventing constructive action to address the consequences of past choices. His ability to transform this guilt into motivation for positive action demonstrates the emotional and spiritual growth that has occurred during his adult years, as he channels his regret into commitment to honoring Kenny's memory through pursuing the reconciliation and friendship restoration that Kenny had worked so hard to make possible. Kyle's conflict with adult Cartman during the funeral and subsequent events reveals how their childhood rivalry has evolved into something more complex and potentially more tragic, as Cartman's apparent transformation into a devoted family man and religious leader creates cognitive dissonance that challenges Kyle's fundamental assumptions about human nature, moral development, and the possibility of authentic change versus sophisticated deception and manipulation. His inability to accept Cartman's apparent conversion reflects both his deep knowledge of Cartman's past behavior and his protective instinct toward potential victims who might be harmed if Cartman's religious persona serves as cover for continued exploitation and manipulation rather than evidence of genuine spiritual transformation. The philosophical questions that Kyle wrestles with regarding Cartman's claimed redemption touch on fundamental issues of forgiveness, human capacity for change, and the appropriate balance between charitable interpretation of others' behavior and realistic assessment of their likely motivations based on established patterns of conduct that may provide better predictive value than current claims or appearances. His struggle to determine whether Cartman deserves the benefit of the doubt or continued suspicion reflects mature understanding of the complexities involved in assessing human behavior and the ongoing challenge of maintaining both appropriate hope for positive change and reasonable protection against continued manipulation or harm. Kyle's ultimate decision to proceed with Kenny's temporal intervention plan, despite Cartman's objections, demonstrates his prioritization of collective welfare over individual concerns and his willingness to make difficult choices that serve larger purposes, even when such choices might create personal loss or disappointment for people whose interests conflict with broader goals and values. His recognition that Cartman's family life, however genuine and meaningful it might be to him personally, cannot justify abandoning the opportunity to restore friendships that could provide greater happiness and mutual support for the surviving members of their childhood group, reflects sophisticated moral reasoning that weighs competing claims and obligations while maintaining focus on outcomes that serve the greatest good for all affected parties. The time travel mission that Kyle undertakes represents both the culmination of his adult development and a return to the collaborative problem-solving and mutual support that characterized his childhood friendships during their best moments, demonstrating how shared commitment to important goals can overcome decades of separation and disappointment, while also creating opportunities for renewal and growth that might not be possible through conventional means. His willingness to risk the unknown consequences of temporal manipulation reflects his mature understanding that some opportunities for healing and restoration justify extraordinary measures when conventional approaches have proven inadequate to address fundamental problems that continue to cause suffering and missed opportunities for human connection and mutual aid. The success of Kyle's intervention in repairing their childhood friendship creates a new timeline where the boys maintain their emotional bonds while developing into healthier and more fulfilled adults whose lives reflect the positive potential that their original timeline had squandered through unnecessary conflict and premature separation, caused by immaturity and failure to prioritize relationships that provided essential support and meaning during their developmental years. The changed timeline demonstrates how small adjustments in key moments can create cascading effects that transform entire life trajectories and enable individuals to achieve levels of happiness and success that might otherwise remain impossible due to choices made during periods when wisdom and perspective remained insufficient for optimal decision-making. Kyle's life in the restored timeline reveals the profound difference that maintained friendships can make in adult development and achievement as he enjoys career success, romantic fulfillment, and family happiness that reflect the confident and purposeful approach to life that becomes possible when individuals receive consistent support and encouragement from people who know them deeply and care about their welfare without conditions or hidden agendas. His marriage and children demonstrate his capacity for intimate relationships and generative commitment that builds upon rather than competing with his friendships, creating a network of relationships that provide different forms of meaning and support, while also contributing to his continued growth and development as person and community member. The professional achievements that Kyle attains in the corrected timeline reflect the full flowering of his intellectual gifts and moral convictions when supported by relationships that provide emotional stability and collaborative kaifin, opportunities for addressing challenges that exceed any individual's capabilities or resources. His work appears to combine his analytical abilities with his commitment to social justice in ways that create positive impact, while also providing personal satisfaction and recognition that validate his choices and encourage continued effort toward goals that serve both individual fulfillment and collective welfare in ways that demonstrate the successful integration of personal and social values. Kyle's relationship with his adult family reveals how his childhood experiences with protection, advocacy, and moral leadership have evolved into capacities for nurturing and guidance that enable him to provide his own children with the security, encouragement, and value formation that will prepare them to face their own challenges, while also contributing positively to their communities and relationships throughout their lives. His parenting style appears to balance high expectations with emotional support in ways that promote both individual excellence and social responsibility, reflecting his understanding of how character development requires both challenge and nurturing within contexts that honor individual dignity, while also emphasizing obligations to others who depend on our choices and behavior for their own welfare and success. The community leadership that Kyle continues to provide in his adult years demonstrates how childhood experiences with crisis response and social coordination can mature into sustained commitment to institutional development and civic engagement that serves long-term community health and resilience, rather than simply responding to immediate crises that demand urgent attention, but may not address underlying systemic issues that create ongoing vulnerability and dysfunction. His approach to adult community service appears to emphasize prevention, education, and capacity building, rather than reactive intervention, reflecting his sophisticated understanding of how lasting positive change requires systematic efforts that address root causes, rather than simply treating symptoms as they emerge. Kyle's ongoing friendship with Stan in the Corrected Timeline reveals how authentic connection between individuals who share fundamental values and mutual respect can provide lifelong sources of support, challenge, and companionship that enrich both personal development and professional achievement, while also creating models for younger generations who observe these relationships and learn about the possibilities for sustained commitment and mutual aid that transcend temporary conflicts and changing circumstances. Their adult friendship demonstrates how childhood bonds can evolve and deepen, rather than simply persisting through habit or nostalgia, creating ongoing opportunities for growth and shared meaning that serve both individual needs and broader social purposes. The resolution of Kyle's relationship with Cartman in the Corrected Timeline appears to achieve the balance between accountability and compassion that Kyle had struggled to find throughout their childhood conflicts, as Cartman's reduced circumstances provide natural consequences for his past behavior, while also creating opportunities for genuine growth and contribution that might not have been possible within the original timeline's patterns of success and failure. This outcome suggests Kyle's mature recognition that justice requires both appropriate consequences for harmful behavior and continued possibilities for redemption and positive contribution when individuals demonstrate genuine change and commitment to better choices. Kyle's reflection on the temporal intervention and its consequences reveals his growing wisdom about the relationship between individual agency and collective welfare, recognizing that personal happiness and fulfillment cannot be permanently separated from the well-being of communities and relationships that provide context and meaning for individual achievements and satisfactions. His willingness to sacrifice his original adult life for the possibility of greater mutual flourishing demonstrates the ultimate expression of the selfless service and commitment to others' welfare that has characterized his development from childhood through adulthood, showing how authentic moral development culminates in choices that transcend narrow self-interest, while also serving deeper forms of personal fulfillment that emerge through genuine service to purposes larger than individual comfort or success. The legacy that Kyle creates through his temporal intervention extends beyond the immediate benefits for his restored friendships to encompass broader demonstrations of how individual commitment to collective welfare can create positive changes that influence entire communities and future, generations who inherit the consequences of choices made by those who possessed both the capability and moral courage to act decisively when opportunities for meaningful positive impact presented themselves despite risks and uncertainties that might have justified safer but less consequential alternatives. In contemplating Kyle's complete journey from childhood idealist through adult disappointment to ultimate redemption and fulfillment, we recognize how authentic moral development requires not only consistent commitment to important values, but also the wisdom and courage to make difficult choices that honor both individual dignity and collective welfare while accepting the ongoing work required to create and maintain relationships and communities that enable all their members to flourish according to their distinctive gifts and circumstances, while contributing to shared goals that transcend any single person's immediate interests or temporary satisfaction. And so we conclude our journey through the remarkable life of Kyle Broflovsky, a character who taught us that intelligence without compassion is hollow, that friendship requires forgiveness, and that growing up means learning when to fight and when to let go. Through every speech, every argument, every moment of moral clarity, Kyle showed us that being right isn't enough, we must also be kind. His evolution from the boy who kicked his baby brother to the man who traveled through time to save his friendships reminds us that growth is possible, that people can change, and that the bonds we form in childhood echo through eternity. As you drift into dreams, carry with you Kyle's unwavering belief in doing what's right, his loyalty to those he loves, and his faith that tomorrow can be better than today. Rest well, knowing that somewhere in the quiet corners of consciousness, there are those who stand guard over justice, who choose hope over cynicism, and who never stop believing in the power of friendship to overcome any obstacle.